Our protagonist, Ethan, has suffered 3 years of humiliation in the Wang family as a useless, dependent son-in-law. He served everyone tea, cleaned up after the dog, worked like crazy, but didn't receive a drop of warmth from his wife. In exchange for his daily work, he received only betrayal and treason, and after that, humiliation and threats of divorce. The Wang family told him that he was just a pathetic hanger-on, and not even worthy of crossing the threshold of their great home. At the very moment Ethan was thrown out the door, a secret order came to him from his clan. His 3-year probation was over. Hundreds of billions in inheritance and the chair of the corporation's head were already waiting for him. Those who had dragged Ethan through the mud yesterday bowed their heads before him in an instant. His ex-wife was now kicking herself, realizing that it was her fault, and she had just ruined her carefree life. The unapproachable owner of the corporation, who had previously not even looked at Ethan, now threw herself into his arms. As a result, this icy girl essentially became his personal secretary. Moreover, even Ethan's arrogant sister-in-law suddenly began to kindly call him son-in-law. Today we'll see a story about a path to the top paved with money, a life surrounded by beauties, and the power to change destinies with the snap of a finger. Our story begins with events that took place at the luxurious 5-star Jiahua Grand Hotel. A young red-haired girl was taking a shower in a steamy bathroom. The guy who was in the room nearby suddenly took her underwear that she left outside. He thought to himself that he had refused to invest a single cent until Lily had agreed to be his girlfriend. Suddenly, someone started knocking loudly and persistently on the door. Hearing that the food delivery had arrived, he quickly headed towards the apartment door. A courier stood in front of him and handed over the order. Suddenly, the same girl appeared behind the man, wearing only a towel wrapped around her naked body. However, before the girl could ask about the food delivery, she froze in shock when she saw 2 men in front of her. The moment the courier saw the girl, he accidentally dropped the bag of food on the floor. In response to this, Joshua immediately began yelling at the delivery worker and insulting him for his carelessness. Continuing to observe what was happening in the apartment, the girl unexpectedly recognized her husband Ethan in the courier. Joshua was dumbfounded by this, and then mockingly noted that the man he had taken for trash worked as a delivery man. Ethan screamed. He worked for Lily and her family for 3 years and was devoted to his wife, but she didn't even let him hold her hand. Having always considered his wife a woman of principle, Ethan could not understand what had driven her to such betrayal. Mockingly repeating her husband's question, the girl, like her lover, called poor Ethan nothing more than a worthless courier. Lily emphasized that Joshua, the heir to the Fang clan from Yunzhou, had a fortune in the tens of billions. Only such a rich man was worthy of such a beautiful woman, and not some poor courier. The billionaire then stated that if Ethan was Lily's husband, then if he got down on his knees and apologized, he might get a good review. To the courier, the two looked like shameless monsters who demanded an apology solely because of their wealth. Joshua was already planning to spend the rest of the evening with Lily. However, when Ethan grabbed his opponent by the throat and demanded that he take his hands off his wife, he screamed in pain and began to beg to be let go. Then Lily stood between them and ordered her husband to immediately release Joshua, threatening him with consequences. The protagonist couldn't believe his ears when his own wife threatened to call security if he didn't take his hands off the billionaire. A long time ago, Ethan first met Lily, and it was his grandfather who chose her as his bride. Remembering his young wife, the hero recalled how he once dreamed of living a long and happy life with her. Now, looking back on those years, the man saw himself as hopelessly naive and hoped that one day Lily would regret everything she had done. As Ethan left the apartment, he heard his wife complaining that she regretted ever having had a loser like him next to her. Returning to the street, the courier greeted another client on the phone. Ethan introduced himself as an employee of the Tuan Tuan delivery service. In response, the unknown man addressed him as a young master and informed him that the 3-year trial as an adopted son-in-law had ended. The next step was to take over the management of the business. The head of the family had already acquired the Huashan Corporation and appointed Ethan as chairman of the board of directors, which made the courier very happy. The interlocutor inquired about Ethan's relationship with the young lady and even offered to include her among the heirs, but the hero refused. Having finished the conversation, he continued on to the next client. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Lily was about to open the door of one of the apartments in the new Yunzhou residential complex. Opening the door and seeing Ethan, The girl angrily accused him of leaving home over such a trifle. In Lily's opinion, there was no problem at all. She had no intention of apologizing to her husband, who ate and drank at her expense. Hearing such arrogant words, Ethan could no longer contain his emotions and slammed his hands on the table with force. He reminded her that he had endured 3 years of humiliation from her parents while she ignored what was happening and did not even allow him to touch her. Screaming with rage, the hero reminded his unfaithful wife how much he loved her. But from that day on, his patience finally ran out. After listening to her husband's entire angry monologue, Lily was shocked to hear his proposal for a divorce. A shocked Lily tried to call him useless again, threatened him several times, and then promised that she would not give up either the Audi or the apartment. But Ethan had absolutely no desire for either a foreign car or a luxury apartment. Enraged, Lily agreed to a divorce and remembered her grandfather who, in a moment of mental turmoil, married his granddaughter to such a loser. Ethan asked that they file for divorce tomorrow. But Lily couldn't do it tomorrow because her grandmother was turning 80, and since their marriage was arranged by older relatives, the issue of divorce also had to be discussed with them. Without objecting, Ethan simply asked his wife to explain everything to her relatives as soon as possible, after which he said that he would wait for her call. Continuing to follow the departing courier, Lily continued to insult him, being sure that he would regret the divorce. Meanwhile, Ethan, having answered the phone near his house, learned that the car waiting for him was literally around the corner. The hero noticed him almost immediately. Standing on the rain-drenched street, the courier saw a whole column of cars with drivers waiting for their young master. The first man who approached him, wearing a business suit and dark glasses, offered him an umbrella, but Ethan immediately refused. Running his hand through his rain-wet hair, the hero hoped the downpour would help cool his thoughts. When one of the men threw a coat over his shoulders, the young man ordered everyone to disperse, and his subordinates immediately obeyed. Then the luxury cars began to move forward, and there were admiring cries from everyone at the sight of the Rolls-Royce. The few passers-by couldn't understand what was happening when a column of luxurious Rolls-Royces appeared in front of them. Lily, who was watching nearby, also didn't understand why so many luxury cars had arrived, as if some great tycoon had appeared in the city. The whole world knew about the Rothschilds and other wealthy dynasties, but no one suspected that the most mysterious family remained the Yi clan. According to the special system for raising the heirs of the Ye clan, candidates underwent a rigorous selection process from the age of 3. By the age of 5, they were studying martial arts and music, and by the age of 18, they had already graduated from business school. The protagonist understood perfectly well the methods of the clan elders, who tempered character through special tests. 3 years ago, his grandfather sent Ethan to the declining Wang family of Yunzhou as a simple adopted son-in-law and servant. He ordered that his true identity not be revealed to anyone, and the young man accepted this challenge. Recalling his first meeting with his future wife Lily, he remembered that the decision back then was completely voluntary. But now, for Ethan, it's finally over. Before the young man stood a huge palace, shining with bright lights, and the hero was finally returning home. The next morning at 10 o'clock, Grandma Wang was receiving birthday greetings at her residence in the Shishan Villa district of Yunzhou. Old Mrs. Wang was listening to wishes for a long life when someone asked where that worthless Ethan, Lily's husband, had disappeared to. With her head bowed sadly, the upset girl reluctantly explained that her husband was absent because he was busy with work. Riley immediately mocked his profession as a food delivery courier, and Mateo said he was a disgrace to the family. Meanwhile, Grandma Wang demanded that Ethan be brought to her immediately, outraged that he had completely lost respect for his elders. However, Lily hastened to explain to her grandmother that Ethan would not be able to come today because they were getting a divorce. Upset by the news of her granddaughter's separation from her husband, Mrs. Wang reminded Lily that this marriage was personally arranged by her grandfather. Not wanting the story of her betrayal to become known to her family, the girl placed all the blame on her husband. She claimed that Ethan allegedly had an affair. Shocked by what she heard, the birthday girl scolded her son-in-law for cheating, reminding him that they had fed him for 3 whole years and even provided him with a car. Mateo stated that Lily was not in a close relationship with Ethan. She was taking care of herself, hoping to one day get rid of her naive husband. In Grandma Wang's opinion, even if all this was true, Ethan still had no right to cheat. so she demanded that he be brought immediately. Agreeing with her grandmother, Lily took out her smartphone and dialed the number of her still legal husband. Seeing the incoming call from Lily, Ethan answered and immediately asked what she needed. When his wife conveyed his grandmother's demand to come to the party, the young man immediately refused. After the conversation ended, Lily told the elderly woman that her husband refused to come. Then Grandma Wang became furious at the arrogance of her shameless son-in-law. When Mateo heard the order to deliver Ethan by force, he immediately agreed, considering it an excellent opportunity to flex his muscles. Lily was silent for a while, but then Grandma Wang decided to tell the assembled relatives something important. She told her family about the appointment of a new chairman of the Huasheng Corporation, but admitted that she had no idea who this mysterious man was. Their company, Dingcheng, had always cooperated with Huasheng, but the contract had not yet been signed. It was therefore crucial to establish contact with the company's new chairman as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the man in the suit accompanying the young gentleman could not understand his actions. The subordinate didn't understand why his boss had changed his clothes again. But Ethan wanted to finish his last day as a courier with dignity. It was not yet time for the young man to reveal his true identity because of a dangerous enemy. Meanwhile, from inside an expensive car moving along a wide city road, Mateo's voice was heard calling Ethan. Wanting to talk to the man, Grandma Wang's eldest grandson learned that the hero was currently delivering an order to the Luyan residential complex. Mateo demanded that Ethan stay there and wait, as he was going to personally come to the place very soon. After some time, the villain caught up with the completely unsuspecting courier on the road. Rolling down the car window, Mateo ordered the young man to get into the car because his grandmother wanted to see him. With barely a glance at Mateo, Ethan repeated that he was determined to divorce Lily. Moreover, even if the grandmother personally began to ask him to change his mind, it would still be useless. Shocked, Mateo accused him of treason. Despite the fact that he was a member of the Wang family, such shameful behavior deserved death. Taking off his helmet, Ethan expressed suspicion that such rumors came from Lily herself and resolutely denied everything. The next moment, to the complete shock of the bewildered Mateo, the young man suddenly laughed loudly. The hero then declared that Lily was a shameless woman and did not understand how a person could stoop to such incredible arrogance. Mateo didn't understand what was happening to Ethan. The man's expression became truly frightening. Deciding that he had simply imagined the whole thing, Mateo again demanded that the young man get into the car and then kneel down outside the hotel. Clenching his fists, he got out of the car and began insulting the courier, trying to provoke him into a fight. Mateo was already preparing to strike his hated son-in-law. But unexpectedly for him, Ethan suddenly delivered a quick and powerful kick. Red bruises instantly appeared on the villain's pale face, and he screamed loudly throughout the street. Clutching his cheek, Mateo called Ethan trash for daring to hit him and threatened to personally carry out the family punishment. Clutching a sharp dagger in his hand, the eldest grandson immediately rushed at Ethan and began waving the weapon around wildly. Catching the right moment, the protagonist knocked the knife out of his opponent's hand with a precise blow, depriving him of the opportunity to win. The next moment, the hero delivered a powerful blow that knocked out his aggressive relative, and the outcome of the fight was finally decided. Ethan demanded that he return and tell his family that he was not a man who could be summoned and sent away with a wave of the hand. The young man said that if he decided not to obey, then no one dared to order him around. As Ethan walked away in his helmet, the defeated Mateo continued to shout insults and threats of revenge after him. Meanwhile, at the Wanhao Hotel, events continued to unfold around Grandma Wang and her immediate family. The old woman, surrounded by her family, was informed that her eldest grandson, Mateo, had returned from a meeting with Ethan. In Grandma Wang's opinion, the young man should have no trouble completing the task. However, the elderly woman stared in shock at her grandson when he emerged from the car with his face covered in bruises and contusions. When his grandmother asked who had beaten him so badly, Mateo pointed to Lily's worthless husband. Upon hearing his son's confession, his father, Vincent, instantly became enraged and declared that he wanted to kill Ethan, whom he considered trash. With tears in his eyes, Mateo began to beg his grandmother to call the police and arrest Ethan. Looking away because it was too painful for her to look at her grandson, the grandmother refused to involve the police to avoid rumors. The elderly woman then sternly ordered Vincent to contact his criminal connections so that they could teach Ethan a harsh lesson. Half an hour later, as Ethan was approaching his house, he encountered two strong men blocking his path. After confirming that it was indeed Ethan in front of them, the imposing thugs smiled ominously and ordered him to follow them. Suspecting that they were sent by the Wang family, the hero refused to go anywhere and reminded them that today was his last day working in delivery. The bandit in the blue sleeveless shirt took this as an invitation to fight, and his partner in the white t-shirt threatened to break his arms first. A split second later, a fight broke out and loud screams, accompanied by blows and groans of pain, were heard all around. Continuing on his way, Ethan, who had not a single scratch or bruise on his body, was relieved to see that the order was undamaged. Suddenly, a rather shabby bandit in a white t-shirt appeared behind him and demanded that he stop. Without turning around, Ethan hit his attacker again. But in doing so, he accidentally dropped the bag of rice for the customer. While the villain was already falling to the ground, the young man picked up the bag and sighed with relief because the food remained safe and sound. The defeated bandits were left lying on the ground, and Ethan rode off on his motorcycle to deliver his last order of the day. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Vincent told his mother, Grandma Van, about the mercenaries that Ethan personally crippled, which greatly shocked her. While the old woman was indignant that no one could rein Ethan in, relatives discussed their son-in-law, acknowledging his mastery of martial arts. At that moment, it was announced that Martin, the general representative of the Tuan Tuan Delivery Company, was going to personally come to congratulate the woman. Vincent quietly whispered to his mother that the guest was Ethan's boss, but his son already had an idea. Martin soon arrived with a smile on his face, holding a gift box containing a bottle of wine. Hearing the sadness in Mrs. Wang's voice, he inquired about the reason for her condition, and the woman then mentioned the misfortune that had happened in the family. Approaching Martin, Vincent began to quietly tell him about Ethan from his younger brother's family. Not understanding where the guy got such courage, he asked in surprise about Ethan, who allegedly cheated on his wife and beat his grandson. Mrs. Wang complained about her lack of connections in Yunzhou, which meant she couldn't properly teach the ungrateful Ethan a lesson. However, Vincent was confident that Martin could help in this matter. When Vincent told the businessman that the guy worked for the Tuan Tuan delivery service, Martin was extremely puzzled by what he heard. The businessman then asked to discuss the matter with him alone. And then, after contacting Mateo by phone, Martin ordered Ethan's number to be checked. After that, he placed an order for delivery to the Wanhao Hotel. 15 minutes later, an unsuspecting Ethan was riding his work motorcycle down the road to the town hotel. The young man called Mr. Ma and informed him of his arrival with the order, and asked him to come to the entrance of the Wanhao Hotel to receive the delivery. However, the general representative of Tuan Tuan ordered the employee to bring the order directly into the hotel. But suspecting that Lily's family was inside, Ethan, and mindful of the ban on couriers, asked the client to go outside. Martin looked at Mrs. Wang with a smile and saw that the woman nodded. Then he asked Ethan to stay near the entrance and wait. Meanwhile, a trap was already being prepared for the hero. Then the businessman asked Ms. Wang, who was standing nearby, to come closer. Upon seeing his subordinate, General Representative Tuan Tuan called out loudly to him and ordered him to take off his uniform and badge, and then hand them over to him. This unexpected scene shocked Ethan, who had no idea what was happening. Then the beaten Mateo pointed to the guy's main boss and said that in front of him stood the General Representative of Tuan Tuan, Martin. If the employee couldn't believe his ears, the businessman was ready to force the manager who had once hired Ethan to call him right now. Hearing the incoming call, Ethan listened to his boss, who was perplexed as to how he had managed to anger President Ma. Ethan, who had wanted to finish his career as Ethan with dignity all this time, was disappointed with the man who ruined his plans. Meanwhile, Martin demanded that his former subordinate take off his uniform, and the young man immediately unbuttoned his work jacket. However, the businessman demanded that he take off all his branded clothing, and Vincent continued to insult the man who dared to beat his son. While taking off his uniform, Ethan again asked Mr. Ma about the end of his term at Tuan Tuan Company this year. Surprised by the dismissed employee's knowledge, Martin wanted to know why he was interested in such a question. Ethan advised his boss not to go to the capital to discuss the contract, as the representative's position could soon become vacant. An indignant Martin shouted that Ethan had no right to decide anything in such matters. And then Mrs. Wang, who had joined the conversation, loudly demanded that her granddaughter's husband kneel down. First, he cheated on and betrayed Lily, and then beat up the birthday girl's grandson. So today she was going to apply family punishment to the scoundrel. Smiling at the old hag's dreams, Ethan didn't understand why he had to kneel at all. Having reminded him of his agreement to obey the family rules, the woman wanted to make sure that this promise was still valid. Pressing his hand to his chest, the young man declared that he had always remained a man of his word and had his own pride. Hearing the words of her granddaughter's husband, the old woman ordered the Wang family's dragon ruler to be brought, after which Vincent immediately rushed to carry out the order. Everyone present, looking at the ruler, knew that after being hit with such an object, the face would hurt for at least 3 days, and after a few blows, it would have turned into a bloody mess. Then the old woman ordered her son to hit Ethan 20 times, and Vincent, filled with hatred, walked towards the boy. Grabbing the dragon ruler, Lily's father, Jonathan, wanted to personally teach a lesson to his son-in-law, whom he claimed had been raised extremely poorly. However, Lily herself suddenly appeared and took the ruler for herself, wanting to personally punish her own husband. After reminding his wife of her infidelity, Ethan was surprised by the accusations against him and did not understand why they were going to use force against him. Calling Ethan her husband, whom she had the right to punish if he deserved it, the girl said that she considered the guy her property. In her mind, allowing others to beat him meant losing her own face. However, ignoring the girl's words, Mateo grabbed the dragon ruler again and was about to strike Ethan. He lunged at Ethan and threatened to smash his face beyond recognition after their recent fight. Having decided to punish the offender at any cost, Mateo was stopped by the main character the very next moment. Immediately after this, Ethan delivered a powerful blow to his opponent's face. It was astonishing for the guests to see the hail of blows rain down on the family's legitimate heir by a man they considered a parasite. Outraged by the boy's cruelty, the birthday girl pointed out that there were officials and directors present in the hall, so Ethan could have been arrested. However, the young man himself considered what happened to be ordinary self-defense. Anyone present could confirm that it was Mateo who attacked first. Then the man with the mustache reminded the hero of his previous words about his readiness to accept punishment. Ethan agreed to accept punishment, but only if he was truly guilty. Supporting the newly beaten Mateo, Grandma Van accused the boy of having an affair behind Lily's back and beating her grandson. However, Ethan called his wife the cheater since the day before she had rented a hotel room with Joshua. People in the audience immediately remembered that Joshua was the second son of the Joshua family, so many believed that the old rumors were true. However, the girl herself began to beg her grandmother and others not to listen to her husband, assuring everyone that she had met with Joshua on business matters. Unable to understand how anyone could discuss business in their robes, Ethan was certain his wife was simply trying to make everyone around him look like fools. At this moment, those present turned around to see the young Master Joshua who had just been mentioned. The guy with a gift for the elderly birthday girl looked at the assembled group in confusion and did not understand the reason for such a noise. Lily accused Ethan's freeloader of spreading rumors and demanded to know why yesterday's meeting was supposedly a business conversation. Upon learning that Ethan was about to reveal his relationship with Lily to everyone, Joshua asked those present not to listen to him. When Ethan brought up the possible connection between Lily and Joshua again, he demanded to see photographs or videos as evidence. Joshua assured the guests that he had been slandered by a man who had just yesterday delivered food to the room and worked as an ordinary courier. He stated that he never expected rude behavior from the delivery person who dropped the order on the floor, which is why he filed a complaint. Noticing Mr. Martin, a representative of Tuan Tuan, among the guests, Joshua asked him to check the history of yesterday's orders. Taking the smartphone, the businessman confirmed Mr. Joshua's words and reported that Ethan had indeed received a low rating for his behavior. Ethan had to listen to complaints from guests who accused him of being vindictive and condemned his low act in connection with the review. Finding his wife with his eyes, the young man asked if she wanted to explain to everyone the real reason why the package with the order had fallen. Then Lily stated that the delivery was disrupted solely due to the poor performance of her husband, who was too nervous about what he saw. After these words, Ethan laughed out loud. The hero sincerely did not understand what prospects there could be for a relationship with this hypocritical woman. The young man then turned to Grandma Wang and decided to find out if she had any evidence of his mistress's existence. Having received such an awkward question, the old woman looked at her granddaughter and her lover in confusion. Having received no evidence, the birthday girl suggested closing the topic, but promised not to ignore the beating of her grandson. Then Ethan suggested calling the police, telling them about Mateo's knife attack and the presence of surveillance footage. The old woman then pointed her finger at the young man and reminded him of the 3 years he had lived off the Wang family. The hero reiterated his respect for Mrs. Wang, but he promised not to touch Mateo until he attacked first again. Then the guy looked at the woman and said that he had only one request left: to get her consent to divorce Lily. The elderly woman reminded the guests that 3 years ago the boy was adopted into their family. This marriage was the last will of her now-deceased husband. Lily lived in misery for 3 years. In order to fulfill her deceased husband's wishes, Mrs. Wang rejected the girl's parents' requests for a divorce. Thanks to the love of her relatives, Lily was considered the first beauty of Yunzhou, so it was clear who was worthy of the other and who was not. Because Ethan beat her grandson and slandered her granddaughter and Joshua, Mrs. Wang expelled him from the family. After this, Vincent asked the waiter to bring wine to all the guests to celebrate this event. The guests raised their glasses and began to congratulate Mrs. Wang and Lily, who had finally gotten rid of such trash as Ethan. The girl's mother, Samantha, thanked everyone present and decided to share additional details. She said that Ethan and Lily lived in separate rooms for 3 years, and that during all this time her husband never even held his wife's hand. Holding a glass of wine in his hand, Ethan assessed his ex-wife's choice. She allowed her family to discuss her like a commodity put up for sale for the best deal. Addressing Lily, the young man congratulated her on receiving the long-awaited opportunity to find a man of her level. Throwing him a disgruntled look, Lily promised to put in a good word with her grandmother so that he wouldn't be kicked out if Ethan got down on his knees and apologized. With a smile on his face, Ethan reminded the girl of her betrayal and was outraged that she was asking him to crawl at her feet. He then deliberately spilled the wine on the floor right in front of a stunned Lily, showing that he didn't think she was worthy of seeing it. The angry girl called Ethan a pathetic commoner and screamed throughout the hall, considering him crazy. After this, Lily turned to her grandmother and declared that simply expelling the boy was too lenient a punishment for him. Ms. Wang told her grandchildren not to worry, saying the worst thing they could do was incur their family's wrath. She explained that if the Wang family had let what Ethan did to her grandchildren go unpunished, they would only have hurt themselves even more. After this, the old woman turned to the heads of all city departments and asked for help in cutting off Ethan's oxygen supply. However, those present did not want to interfere in this matter for the sake of a small parasite. However, Joshua, representing his fan clan, guaranteed that Ethan would not be allowed to use the services of Yunzhou hotels. He intended not only to take possession of his wife, but also to force the young man to crawl on his knees in the mud before him. Restaurant chain owner Gray also supported the Wang family, promising that the main character would not be able to get a job in any establishment. Martin also intervened and assured those gathered that the guy would no longer be able to carry boxes, even for other delivery services. So, with the doors to the hospitality and delivery industries closed to Ethan, he wanted to know what other restrictions awaited him. Then the TV channel's CEO promised that he wouldn't have a single chance of getting a job even as a waiter in a bar or karaoke bar. Mateo reminded the guests of the guy's outstanding kung fu skills and asked them to do everything possible to avoid him being hired as a bodyguard. The inspired guests recalled that there were indeed many wealthy people in Yunzhou, but no one could know them all personally. At the very last moment, everyone present noticed an elegant young girl behind them. The people invited to Old Lady Wang's party didn't know this girl and couldn't even remember when exactly she appeared in the hall. Vincent was the first to come to his senses. He was delighted to see President Scarlett and apologized for not being able to meet her on time. Almost falling in love with the luxurious guest, the Tuan representative asked Mr. Wang to tell him who this girl was. Vincent said that in front of them was the famous vice president of the Huashen Company, Scarlett. No one had ever seen the secretive leader of Huashen, but rumors circulated throughout the city about the incredible concentration of power in the hands of this woman. She negotiated deals worth billions and was second only to the president of the corporation, but stood above thousands of other employees. The protagonist, who continued to look at the striking guest, suddenly realized that this girl worked for his company. If there was one person who knew absolutely every rich person in the city, it was Scarlett. Martin considered the girl so beautiful that, in his opinion, any rich man would dream of meeting her. However, Scarlett did not appreciate this remark. To her, His words sounded as if she had been in the arms of the entire city. Realizing his mistake, Martin immediately began to apologize. But he could not believe that such a wonderful vice president could so easily achieve everything she wanted. Vincent then asked her to cut off Ethan's oxygen supply. He recalled that his family had previously given her a number of bribes in exchange for investments amounting to $70 million. Without answering her friend's request, Scarlett silently took a cigarette out of the pack and prepared to light it. At that very moment, 4 men took out lighters, trying to help the girl. The corporate vice president lounged on the sofa while 4 men stood helpfully nearby with lit lighters. Then the girl called Ethan to her. The hero noticed how busy the vice president looked, something he had never noticed before, and was at a loss as to what he should do. Looking kindly at the young man, Scarlett asked him to light her cigarette. Everyone present was shocked by this request, and did not understand why such an honor went to Ethan. Approaching the girl, the guy with his hands in his pockets was unable to light a cigarette due to the lack of a light. Hearing this, those around him were amazed that he did not borrow anyone's lighter for the sake of the main goddess of high society, Scarlett. Rising to her feet, the woman walked over to Ethan, who was still standing. In a more serious tone, she demanded that the young man state his name. But he did not immediately understand her question. When the vice president asked again for his name, Ethan said she was hard of hearing because Vincent had already said his name. Vincent immediately started yelling at Ethan, demanding that he stop being rude to Ms. Scarlett. But the girl just waved her hand. Putting her hand on Ethan's shoulder, she decided to give him a chance, since he and the new president of the corporation had the same last name. Scarlett then called him handsome and promised to hire him as a bodyguard if he would follow her orders. The women in the room didn't understand why President Scarlett was going to protect this guy and appoint him as her bodyguard. Meanwhile, Lily, standing behind the others, could not understand Scarlett's plans regarding her still legal husband. Vincent, surprised that the new Huasheng president had the surname Ye, turned to Madame Scarlett again and asked what his name was. Scarlett explained that he preferred to remain in the shadows, but the girl herself did not know the boss's full name. But she could not admit it. As far as Ethan could tell, Scarlett didn't know who he really was. Otherwise, she wouldn't have asked him to light her cigarette. The vice president then demanded that the young man kneel down, bow to Ms. Wang, and then apologize and promise to leave. Scarlett promised to take Ethan on as her bodyguard with an annual salary of $200,000. And the guests were amazed at how diligently she protected him. Frightened by Scarlett's behavior, Lily noticed that the guests' eyes were fixed on the vice president and reported this to her grandmother. Old Lady Wang noted that Scarlett had a high rank, so it was no surprise that she became vice president at such a young age. Scarlett never made people angry without reason, and had the ability to drive men crazy. But to Lily's great surprise, her husband refused the tempting offer from the company's vice president. The girl even froze in place for a moment in surprise. Scarlett did not expect such an answer and demanded that the guy repeat his refusal. She was amazed at his incredible audacity, because he dared to refuse to work for her right in front of everyone present. Turning sharply to face the persistent girl, Ethan grabbed her by the ear and loudly repeated his refusal to comply with her demands. Scarlett, flushed with embarrassment, grabbed her ear and screamed in unexpected pain. Vincent called Ethan an impudent person who dared to raise his hand against the vice president. But the guy simply assumed that the girl had heard poorly. Still in shock from the young man's actions, Scarlett realized that he had completely lost his mind. Then, turning to Senior Madame Wang, Scarlett joined the boycott and promised to cut off Ethan's access to Yunzhou. The guests laughed at the guy, who was opposed by Scarlett herself. So now he definitely won't be able to survive in this city. When Ethan asked whether she was speaking on behalf of herself or the corporation, Scarlett replied that she was speaking on behalf of both. Reminding the girl that she was only a vice president, the hero did not understand why she decided to speak on behalf of the entire company. One of the women agreed with his words. In her opinion, Scarlett could not speak for the president unless she was very close to him. Then Scarlett stated that she was President Ye's lover, but she did not want to reveal this fact because of the gentleman's desire to remain in the shadows. These words came as a complete surprise to Ethan. He could not understand at what moment he became this girl's lover. The girl continued to repeat the words about her connection with the head of the corporation, and the protagonist was amazed at how calmly she said such things. According to those around him, it was no surprise that the mysterious President Ye was in a relationship with Scarlett. Delighted that President E was Scarlett's lover, Vincent remembered the bribes and investments of 70 million. Scarlett stated that her man was a very serious person who clearly separated work and personal life. For Ethan, all these revelations looked like a deception. The girl was simply afraid of being exposed and therefore came up with such an excuse. The corporation's vice president looked at the young man, not understanding why he suddenly started laughing. Ethan said that although Scarlett was a beautiful woman, it seemed unlikely to the hero that such a businessman would pay attention to her. The girl then stated that President Ye fell in love with her at first sight, rented an island, arranged a ceremony, and begged her to become his lover. Ethan didn't want to argue with this girl and took her stories as nothing more than a figment of her fertile imagination. Then the young man turned his gaze to Lily and suggested that she go straight to the registry office with him. Mateo asked them to take their time, to set the tables and put a bowl at the entrance so Ethan could eat before leaving town. Thanking Martin for forcing Ethan to take off his uniform and lose his job, Mateo was delighted. Ethan, who clearly heard the conversation between the two, came to the conclusion that it was time to finish with Martin. Having dialed his butler's phone number, the hero began talking about the courier who constantly bought lunches for his grandfather. As it turns out, the person he was talking about was Tuan Tuan's CEO, Simon. The young man then asked his assistant to contact this person and fire the Yunzhou representative named Martin. The man on the other end of the line immediately accepted the order and added that he had long dreamed of meeting the gentleman. Moreover, this man's fortune has already exceeded 500 billion. Then Ethan one day asked to arrange a meeting and a joint feast for him, and the assistant also agreed to carry out this order. The guests at the party only silently listened to his business conversation with his subordinates from the company. Mateo laughed and began to ridicule this braggart, especially amused by the order to dismiss the representative. Martin didn't believe Ethan's words, considering them fairy tales, and advised the young man not to try to scare anyone. He called Grandpa Ethan a peasant and said that President Wu owned hundreds of billions, so he would never treat him to dinner. Watching these conversations, the vice president of the Huashen Corporation only silently watched all the participants of what was happening. And then Martin received a call on his phone, and seeing the name of President Wu, with whom he was going to discuss the extension of the contract, he became wary. However, the boss said that Martin's license to be the company's general representative in Yunzhou had been revoked. These words sounded like a bolt from the blue to him. Martin glanced away, not wanting the numerous guests in the room, including Scarlett, to know what had happened. Realizing that it was all over for him, Martin thanked the president for the new cooperation and stated that he was preparing a contribution of 8 million. But the president reiterated that the license would be revoked and no amount of money would be able to help him. As if not paying attention to these words, Martin agreed with his boss and promised to continue cooperation. Meanwhile, Ethan, watching the man's conversation with his superiors, thought that the butler probably hadn't had time to contact Simon yet. Holding a glass in his hand, Mateo proposed a toast to the successful renewal of Martin's contract, to which he immediately and somewhat sheepishly agreed. The young man then proposed a toast to Mr. Ma, wishing him prosperity. Ethan watched Martin, who was barely holding back tears, while Mateo, after drinking a glass to the bottom, called him a sincere man. When Scarlett inquired about his well-being due to his tears, Martin hastened to reassure the girl and attributed his condition to strong vodka. However, Ethan noticed that everyone had long since seen through the man's game, so he suggested that they tell him directly about his dismissal. Angered at Ethan for the humiliation, Martin attributed his resignation to Tuan Tuan's new strategy. The protagonist chuckled quietly, considering this decision the best outcome for Martin. From that moment on, the man would have significantly fewer enemies. However, some of those present admitted that Ethan was to blame for what happened. It was he who got him fired. Some of the guests were already afraid to speak out openly against Ethan, not wanting to bring trouble upon themselves. Lily's mother reminded that this man and his village relatives could not possibly have been acquainted with President W. The rest of his relatives were also sure that he would not have encountered such difficulties if he had really known influential people. Wealthy heirs didn't tolerate sidelong glances, but Ethan hadn't managed to gain respect in 3 years. Meanwhile, 2 men took Mr. Ma by the arms and asked him to leave, while Martin begged Miss Wang to show leniency. Ethan considered them to be corrupt people and was no longer surprised that Lily had betrayed him for money. As the chefs began rolling out carts with prepared dishes, The event hosts invited guests to the table for appetizers. Then Lily asked her husband to eat first, and then file for divorce, so as not to ruin her grandmother's holiday. Sitting down at the dining table, Ethan began sampling the food and agreed to wait for Lily to finish her meal. Suddenly, one of the women accidentally touched Ethan's spoon with hers. She was indignant, considering the guy to be trash and deciding that her cutlery was now dirty. There were pieces of papaya on the plate in front of her. And then the hero remembered that it makes breasts grow. Ethan chuckled and thought that this might help the lady. But she became angry and wanted to understand what exactly the man was hinting at. Looming over Ethan, the woman repeated her complaints about the strange hints in a rude tone. Then the hero asked her to forget his words. But in her heart, the woman became even more angry because he did not pay any attention to her. She then asked her grandmother not to allow Ethan to sit at the table. Since he had not prepared a gift, he had no right to be at the party. In response, Old Lady Wang reminded them of the Wang family's ability to keep their word. So, in her opinion, the divorce could very well take place after dinner. Ethan thanked the older woman for forbidding him from an immediate divorce, in his opinion. Without her stubbornness, his entire mission would have failed. Then Ethan made another call, mentioning Mrs. Wang's anniversary and the gift he had prepared for her, and asked her to deliver it to Wanhao. Lily, who had been looking at her husband with disdain, decided that his conscience had finally awakened. But she had no intention of accepting his gift. She demanded that he cancel the order and not embarrass himself. If he really wanted to congratulate his grandmother, he could have bought a gift and given it through the servants. Seeing her husband calmly continuing to eat on the sidelines, the angry girl screamed, outraged by his unwillingness to listen to her. 10 minutes later, a man in a courier uniform entered the hotel lobby with a bag in his hands. The hotel employee who blocked his way apologized and said that due to the Wang family's banquet, outsiders were not allowed to enter. However, the courier explained that he had come to make a delivery and asked those present who the birthday boy was. He spoke about meeting the owner of a Rolls-Royce car, who was unable to come in person, but asked him to give him a gift. Upon hearing that the gift was intended for his grandmother, he immediately asked to pass it on. Having opened the box, Mateo eagerly wanted to see the long-awaited gift for his relative. The guy looked in amazement at the incredible bracelet made of ice jade, shimmering with cold reflections. He couldn't find a single flaw. It was made of the highest quality material, and he valued the jewelry at least 10 million. The other guests in the hall were also amazed that an item worth 10 million was entrusted to the first courier they met. Many people wanted to meet such a bold tycoon. While everyone present discussed the luxurious jade bracelet for the elderly woman, Ethan calmly continued eating. Mrs. Wang's amazed relatives and the other guests unanimously declared this bracelet to be the most expensive gift of the entire day. Then the guests approached the lady to find out the identity of the donor. But the woman herself did not know who he was. Everyone was trying to figure out who had sent the decoration, since all the Wang family's acquaintances were gathered in the hall today. Lost in thought, Riley assumed that the luxurious gift was sent by a secret admirer. Riley had a great figure. She was only 20 years old. She didn't have a boyfriend, and any rich man would dream of having a girl like her. Vincent, calling his daughter a beauty with millions of followers, suggested that the gift could have been sent by one of her wealthy fans. Scarlett congratulated President Wang in advance, whose future son-in-law was generous enough to give gifts worth tens of millions. From the outside, it seemed to Ethan that these people would rather believe in mythical admirers than admit that he had made the gift himself. Then the guy asked Lily if she had finally eaten, and heard an affirmative answer from his wife. Then he, reminding her that he had already given a gift to his wife's grandmother, suggested going to the registry office to file for divorce. Hearing the young man's last words, Lily asked again about the gift, wanting to know when exactly he had given it. To convince the girl, Ethan pointed to a magnificent jade bracelet, declaring that it was his gift for Old Lady Wang. For Vincent, the whole situation was ridiculous. It seemed impossible to him that Ethan could earn tens of millions even in his lifetime. Riley asked her sister to calm the loser down, believing the gift to be the work of his fan, and Mateo noted the poverty of Ethan's family. Insistently demanding to go to the registry office, Lily declared that she did not intend to remain the wife of such a worthless man for a second longer. Turning to elder Madame Wang, Ethan reminded her that they had been a family for 3 years, and in honor of her birthday, he gave her a jade bracelet. The irritated mother-in-law demanded that Ethan stop pretending and leave, considering this parasite a disgrace to the Wang family. Mateo also demanded that the guy leave Yunzhou by train immediately after the divorce, not wanting to see him in the city anymore. As he headed for the exit, Ethan calmly stated that it was his own decision whether to leave or not, and no one had the right to tell him what to do. Finding himself outside the walls of a huge hotel, the protagonist approached an expensive car parked on the side of the road. Joshua, who was driving, relayed to Ethan Lily's words that he was not worthy of sitting in someone else's car, and offered him the use of his bike. Then the young man promised to wait for him at the entrance to the registry office. Meanwhile, a taxi driver arrived, and Ethan told him that he needed to go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. After some time, the hero and his wife arrived at the right place and immediately headed to the mediation office. The guy was relieved to realize that he would be able to obtain divorce papers. After 3 years, he was no longer the son-in-law of the family that considered him a dependent. Ethan decided to devote himself to his career, while Lily and Joshua were already calling him an abandoned woman, not a freeloader, which seemed even more shameful to them. Having turned to his ill-wishers, the young man did not listen to them, since he was now happy and had nothing in common with them. As he drove away in a taxi, Lily screamed insults at him, calling him a pathetic loser and useless trash. Sitting next to her lover, she asked him to follow Ethan and find out whether he was going to leave the city or stay. Joshua stepped on the gas, assuming his former rival was heading to the train station. Catching up with the taxi Ethan was in, he reminded Lily that his oxygen supply in Yunzhou had been cut off, and if he left, he would die of starvation. Mentally agreeing with Joshua, the girl again remembered the strange expression on her ex-husband's face. Joshua, who had been keeping a close eye on the road, noticed that the taxi had turned onto the wrong road leading to the station. Lily assumed Ethan was heading to the airport, but Joshua disagreed and pointed towards Lake Sihu. The girl began to suspect that Ethan might have decided to stay. According to Joshua, the loser might be looking for a cheap hotel. However, thanks to his connections, the rich man was confident that he would not be allowed into any hotel lower than 4 stars. 10 minutes later, the taxi arrived at the luxurious Four Seasons Hotel on the shores of Westlake. Looking up at Ethan as he walked up the steps, the lovers decided he was going to get a job there as a waiter. Lily remembered her family's words about how it was impossible to get a job as a servant. But he still tried, regardless of people's connections. Taunting the guy, Joshua contacted the hotel manager and reported the man who had come to apply for a job. He demanded that a certain Ethan, who had entered the hotel, be immediately thrown out. However, Joshua's expression suddenly changed dramatically, as if something strange had happened. Referring to the manager's words that there were no job applications at the hotel, Joshua could not understand why Ethan had come there if not to get a job. Looking at Lily, he suddenly assumed that Ethan might have been staying in an expensive hotel. The girl rejected this idea, recalling that the cost of the night was $8,000, and during the divorce she took the cards from Ethan. Having decided to stop guessing, the lovers suggested going to the hotel and finding out everything from the administration. In the lobby of the Four Seasons, the receptionist announced that Ethan had, in fact, already checked in. He paid for 7 days at once, spending more than $50,000, which surprised Lily and Joshua. Shocked that the scoundrel spent $560,000, Lily accused Ethan of hiding part of the money intended for groceries and dog food. According to a hotel employee, Mr. Ethan did not stay in a regular room, but rented a presidential suite. These words came as a bolt from the blue to Lily Joshua. Knowing that one night in the presidential suite cost $80,000, Joshua quickly calculated that for a 7-day stay, the cost was $560,000. Joshua then added that there was no way Ethan could have saved up $500,000 on dog food alone. The girl then approached the hotel employee again and asked if Ethan had really paid $560,000. And she answered yes. And then suddenly, the administrator remembered about the tip from the rich guest. Suddenly, the girl started yelling at the hotel staff, calling them crazy and accusing them of taking money from the Wang family. Walking away from the front desk, Joshua told Lily to forget about the tip, wondering where Ethan got that kind of money. Remembering that her ex-husband often appeared near her grandmother, supposedly taking care of the dog, the girl suspected him of stealing antique vases. Upon hearing this, Joshua immediately urged her to urgently call home and check her things, after which Lily took out her smartphone. Meanwhile, Grandma Wang's 80th birthday celebration continued at the Wanhao Hotel. The guests were still waiting for the mysterious giver of the bracelet to appear. Not wanting to leave without seeing her wealthy benefactor, Vice President Scarlett tapped her fingers on the table. According to the deputy head of the corporation, even taking into account the traffic jams on the road to Lake Shihu, this person should have arrived by now. Suddenly, it occurred to the woman that it was Ethan who had given her the jade bracelet, and not someone else. Samantha picked up the phone at that moment to answer her daughter, and immediately began asking her about her divorce from the worthless Ethan. Lily asked her mother to go straight to her grandmother's and check the antiques and paintings, accusing her ex-husband of stealing the items and selling them. The mother, screaming into the phone, could not believe that this vile scoundrel was able to rob Grandma Van. Scarlett sighed with relief and lit a cigarette. She had almost begun to consider the guy an important person, but in the end, he turned out to be an ordinary thief. The woman stood up from her seat and began to say goodbye to elder Madame Wang, as she had some business to attend to. As the birthday girl and her son accompanied her to the car, they expressed their hope of receiving funding. The remaining guests also began to disperse, having finally abandoned hope of seeing the mysterious rich man that day. Returning to the hotel hall, Old Lady Wang asked her relatives if they had managed to establish the identity of the robber. Samantha relayed Lily's words about Ethan staying in the presidential suite for a week and spending almost $600,000. Hearing all this, the old woman screamed with strong indignation and resentment at the actions of the parasite Ethan. The old lady then asked Vincent and Riley to stay and sent Mateo, Samantha, and Jonathan to the villa for inspection. After some time, a car carrying Mrs. Wang's relatives arrived at Shishan Villa. Once inside, Mateo suggested to his uncle that they split up, declaring that he would take the room with the antiques. After 20 minutes of careful inspection, Mateo was convinced that all the things were completely safe, and his uncle's things were also in order. The boy discovered that everything in the treasury and other places was in its place, which meant that nothing was missing from his grandmother. Following the investigation, Mateo concluded that there was no evidence of a crime on Ethan's part. However, unexpectedly, the young man told his uncle that he wanted to check everything again to be absolutely sure that the things were safe. Taking his late grandfather's watch, one of only 48 in the world worth over $5 million, Mateo decided to carry out a plan. He silently congratulated Ethan on stealing them. Then, feigning indignation, Mateo returned to his uncle and reported that the clock had disappeared from the room he had just checked. Upon seeing the empty box, the angry relatives began to insult Ethan, accusing him of wasting money on a luxury hotel room. Jonathan immediately called his mother and reported the disappearance of his grandfather's Richard Mille watch, worth $5 million. Enraged, Mrs. Wang demanded that Ethan be seized, dragged to the inn, and subjected to the most severe punishment by cutting off his hands. After this, the uncle conveyed to his nephew the grandmother's order to immediately go after Ethan and catch him, which confused the young man. Not wanting to get hit by the strong Ethan again, Mateo, holding his reddened cheek, suddenly began to complain of pain. As he climbed the steps, the boy told his uncle that he had to go first and promised to join him later. Meanwhile, Jonathan picked up the phone and decided to check with Lily if she was still at the Four Seasons Hotel. As it turned out, Lily was still there. When the girl heard from her father that a luxury watch worth $5 million had disappeared from her grandmother's house, she broke out in a cold sweat. When Joshua approached his beloved, he learned that Ethan had stolen things from her grandmother's house. This news horrified the girl, and she demanded that the administrator tell her the number of the room in which Ethan was staying. Lily stated that she intended to catch the villain and bring him home, as he had stolen a watch worth $5 million from her grandmother. Surprised by the girl's violent reaction, Joshua thought about how happy she was to have the opportunity to see Ethan again. Then Joshua strongly advised Lily not to make a scene here, and said that it would be better to call the police. However, the outraged girl suddenly pushed a man away and declared that she would deal with the thief herself, accusing him of cowardice. Arriving at the door of the presidential suite, an angry Lily began to knock vigorously on the door. She demanded that the thief Ethan open the door for her right now. The hero, who appeared on the threshold of the room, was outraged by the appearance of this restless woman, who began looking for him immediately after the divorce. At that moment, Ethan had just stepped out of the shower, appearing before her in this state. A little embarrassed, the girl looked at her now ex-husband and could not take her eyes off his body. Then the girl thought that if she had known about this earlier, she would have made him walk around the house without a shirt. However, Out loud, she only asked about the theft of an expensive Richard Mille watch from her grandmother. But Ethan did not understand what exactly she was talking about. Lily demanded that he stop pretending, and again reminded him of the 5 million watch stolen from her grandmother. Pointing to the luxurious furnishings of the room, the girl stated that even she herself had never lived in such conditions. Surprised by the Wang family's behavior, the hero categorically denied the accusations and demanded that Mrs. Wang leave the room. The girl looked at her ex-husband, who had never addressed her in such a way before, her eyes wide with surprise. As her husband, Ethan always called her by her first name when he gave her flowers, called her his beloved wife, or addressed her as his goddess. Lily didn't understand why her ex-husband was trying to throw her out of the room, and she even suspected that there was another woman inside. Considering the girl inadequate, the main character warned that he would call security if she did not leave. Unhappy with Ethan's refusal, the girl said that she wanted to give him a chance to return, admit his guilt, and end the story there. However, now she was ready to go to the police. She warned him not to say later that he had not been warned. But before the girl could finish her tirade, the door of the room slammed shut right in her face. Considering Lily a woman who took advantage of his love, Ethan did not understand why love made people so pathetic. At this time, the girl continued to shout outside the door that she was going to call the police and that he should get ready for jail. Meanwhile, the hotel's banquet hall was still hosting Old Lady Wang's birthday celebration. Dissatisfied with her granddaughter's behavior, the woman sternly reminded her that all family matters were to be decided by her alone. Samantha explained her daughter's actions by the fact that Ethan could be stubborn, in addition to the fact that he was no longer a member of their family. Agreeing with her, Ms. Wang stated that Ethan was destined to rot in prison because he had brought shame on their family. 10 minutes later, 2 police officers asked Lily to tell them again in detail about the theft of the watch worth 5 million. Calling the hero a former son-in-law and a parasite, the girl told them about renting a luxury room where he allegedly brought girls. Then one of the police officers demanded that the administrator contact Ethan and ask him to come downstairs. At this time, the hero was relaxing on a large sofa when suddenly the phone rang. Unhappy with her ex-husband ignoring her, Lily decided that he was afraid of being accused of theft, and that was why he did not answer her calls. The police then headed to the elevator and, with the girl's consent, decided to go directly up to Ethan's room. Finally, the hero woke up from a loud knock on the door. When the young man in the robe opened the door, he heard the policeman ask if he really was Ethan. Introducing himself as the local station chief, whose surname was Lee, the officer reported Ms. Lily's complaint regarding the theft of the watch. Lee then relayed the Wang family's words that Ethan was a poor son-in-law with no money, worked as Ethan, and did not receive a penny after the divorce. Since the presidential suite cost $80,000, the policeman asked about the origin of the money if the guy hadn't stolen anything. After this, Ethan turned around and headed deeper into the room, asking the police officers to wait for 1 minute. Approaching the table, he took several documents, intending to show them to the police. After showing the Huasheng Corporation share transfer agreement, he claimed to be a shareholder and general director of the company. The police officer then looked closely at the business card and saw that it was a black metal card with gold embossing and diamonds. For Lee's young partner, it looked too incredible, so he decided that what they were looking at was a fake. Lee then wanted to check Ethan's information through the Heavenly Eye database, which allowed him to study the history of companies and information about debtors. Ethan explained that the founder of this base was a friend of his brother. Since he did not want to reveal his identity, he asked to hide his information. During the call, Ethan told him that the police were going to check him through Heaven's Eye and asked his friend to open his profile for 10 minutes. Within a minute, the young man asked the police to check all his personal information themselves. Both police officers entered the name of Huasheng Corporation into the search bar to obtain the necessary information. Soon, a photo of Ethan in a business suit appeared, with his initials and title as the company's CEO listed next to it. Looking at the young man again, the police were confused and even suggested that the database might have been hacked. Ethan had no intention of revealing the size of his capital. But if the inspector still didn't trust him, the hero was ready. Having opened a bank account on his device, the guy offered to let the police officers personally review the information. Seeing the completed quick payment of 560,000 yuan and the account balance of 10 billion, The police were shocked. Then the hero asked whether a person with such means would really steal a watch worth 5 million. Impressed by what he saw, Chief Lee did not understand why he had lived in the Wang family as a parasite for so long. Hoping to keep the secret, the protagonist explained that what was happening was the will of his clan, and added that he could not control this decision. Well aware of the quirks of rich people, Department Head Lee reassured Ethan and promised not to reveal details of his personal life. Already in the corridor, the police officers apologized for the disturbance, and Ethan kindly wished them a safe journey. A few minutes later, in the hotel lobby, police officers advised Lily to return home and look for the watch again. Joshua couldn't understand how this was possible, and the girl was outraged that the police took her ex-husband at his word. Hearing the girl call Ethan a beggar, the police only chuckled, remembering the 10 billion in his account. Without probable cause, they were unable to detain Mr. Ethan. So Chief Lee offered to provide video footage of the theft, but Lily continued to prove herself right. She claimed that she would never have left Ethan if he had been even a little more successful. The surprised policeman couldn't believe that it was the girl who left her husband, but she was sure that Ethan now regretted what happened. She looked questioningly at the police chief, shocked that the girl had voluntarily abandoned the billionaire. Suddenly, Lily asked the police officers if there was a woman in Ethan's room. Bowing slightly, Chief Lee stated that Ethan was completely alone in the room. After this, the girl started talking about how her ex-husband allegedly still had feelings for her. As Joshua watched the two police officers leave, he couldn't understand why they were so polite to Ethan. Hearing the phone ring, the girl answered her brother Mateo, who was asking if the police had detained Ethan after calling his sister. Stepping away from Joshua, the girl told her brother that the police refused to detain Ethan without evidence. Not fully understanding the details of the conversation, Mateo wondered about evidence of the theft, or at least confirmation of the sale of the expensive watch. Holding the blue box in his hands, Mateo knew perfectly well that he would not be able to provide evidence, since the watch was in his possession. However, the guy still hoped to find someone who would confirm the purchase of the watch from Ethan, so he promised his sister to arrange everything. Hearing her brother's assurances, Lily was slightly confused and looked thoughtfully at the phone for a while. Thinking about Mateo and his likely success in trying to put Ethan behind bars, the girl couldn't understand what consequences it could lead to. In the midst of her endless thoughts, Lily suddenly remembered how Ethan had once asked her if she liked her new hair curl. Lost in almost pleasant memories, the girl didn't even notice Joshua's slightly embarrassed look. Having embraced the girl, the young man invited her to spend the night at the Four Seasons Hotel. However, Lily suddenly slapped him in the face and accused him of not even being able to cope with Ethan, but already climbing into her bed. Holding his reddened cheek, Joshua promised to deal with Ethan as soon as he had the chance. Meanwhile, the manager quietly began to praise his friend for choosing such an incredible girl, calling her a real beauty. Joshua grabbed the manager abruptly and demanded that he be informed immediately if Ethan left the hotel. At 6 o'clock in the morning, our protagonist finally left his room. The hotel staff were almost shocked to see the elegant guest in front of them. To the girl at the reception desk, Ethan seemed like a real, powerful leader, with a completely different aura than the day before. As the hero headed for the exit, the manager quickly informed Joshua that Ethan had left the room. He then got into the car and followed the guest, staying on his tail and reporting to Joshua that he was heading to the city center. 20 minutes later, the taxi stopped in front of the Huashen Corporation building, and Ethan stepped out. Remembering Scarlett, who had blocked all his work opportunities the day before, the guy wondered how she would react to him now. Meanwhile, Joshua learned about Ethan's trip to the company office, and remembering Scarlett's threats, the man assumed that the girl had decided to take revenge on him. However, for himself personally, he perceived what was happening as a wonderful chance to get closer to the girl. Hearing an incoming call on her smartphone, Scarlett picked it up, not knowing who had decided to contact her at such an early hour. Joshua introduced himself and addressed the president, reminding the girl that at Mrs. Wang's banquet yesterday, he raised a toast to her beauty. Speaking about the Wang family's former son-in-law, Ethan, the man said that he showed up at the Huasheng Corporation office today, probably seeking revenge. But Scarlett asked her interlocutor not to worry, and noted that the access control system and security service were working properly. However, Joshua nervously reported that Ethan had already passed through the turnstile with a pass and gone upstairs in the elevator. Hearing these words, the girl was shocked and did not understand how the scoundrel ended up with a Huashen Corporation pass. The man then told the story that Ethan had stolen the watch from the Wang family, sold it for $5 million, and bought a pass from one of the employees. Joshua added that he would consider it a real tragedy if this villain stabbed a beauty like her. Getting up from the sofa, Scarlett thanked the man for the warning and promised to immediately send security to check. Joshua said he wanted to come to the corporation's office as soon as possible and help her, but all he heard in response was short beeps. The girl then called her assistant and ordered him to immediately check the company's office for suspicious people. If any were discovered, she ordered that the police be called immediately. Half an hour later, a young woman appeared at the Huashen Corporation office. After passing the pass through the turnstile, Janet, Scarlett's secretary, entered the building. One of the guards found the girl innocent and charming, although she was inferior to Scarlett in charisma. Her simplicity evoked sympathy. Opening the office door, Janet immediately began asking the stranger how he got into the office. Ethan, who had been studying the documents, looked up from the papers and calmly asked who she was. After introducing herself, the girl stated her name and said that she held the position of secretary to President Scarlett at the Huashen Corporation. It remained a mystery to Ethan why a woman like Scarlett would hire such a secretary. Meanwhile, Janet demanded to know the purpose of his visit to the company and asked what he was thinking about. Then Ethan briefly introduced himself and calmly stated that he was now the new president of Huashen Corporation. These words immediately plunged the girl into horror. She realized that she had made a terrible mistake. The secretary apologized to him and told him about the order to search for strangers in the building. Taking her words as another attempt by the Wang family to spy on him, the protagonist ordered the secretary to return to her duties. Knowing that President Scarlett was considered the first beauty of the Yunzhou business world, Ethan asked to invite her to the office. Entering the women's restroom, the secretary called Scarlett, who immediately began to find out whether there were any strangers in the office. Janet told her boss that it was not a stranger who had appeared at the company, but President Ye, who wanted to meet her in person. This news greatly surprised Scarlett. Having promised the secretary to come immediately, she ended the conversation, continuing to think about what this could mean. 10 minutes later, the woman entered the lobby of the business center, where the secretary immediately joyfully called out to her boss. When Scarlett asked where the new president was, the girl pointed to the office. She recalled that the manager had asked her to come to him immediately after Ms. Scarlett's arrival. As Scarlett walked towards the new director's office, she noticed several female employees and was confused as to why they had arrived at work so early. According to Janet, news of the arrival of the handsome new CEO spread through the work chat, and employees rushed to see him in person. Turning to her assistant, Scarlett asked her opinion of the new manager's appearance. A little embarrassed, Janet admitted that he looked more handsome than many movie stars, was very young, and looked to be about 23 years old. Stunned by his age, Scarlett remembered that she herself had only become vice president at 32, which was already considered a rarity. After this, she ordered a subordinate to gather all the employees as she was unhappy with their reaction to the new boss. Trying to smooth things over, the secretary hastened to assure her boss that she herself was not one of the manager's enthusiastic admirers. The girl then added that the president called Scarlett the first beauty of Yunzhou, and such an early visit could have been connected with the desire to see her. However, Scarlett said that for her, having been in business circles for many years, there was no man she could not handle. Immediately agreeing with her boss, the secretary stated that she could not recall a time when Scarlett had failed. She remembered the billionaire who no one could persuade to do anything, but Scarlett managed to subjugate him to her will in just 2 minutes. Approaching the new president's office, Scarlett deliberately decided to leave the door open. She told the employees to stay put and watch as she tamed the new manager. Janet, delighted, longed to see again the scene when the man knelt before his boss and helped her put on her shoes. Scarlett was sure that the new CEO would also soon understand who was in charge of this company. In Scarlett's opinion, in the current situation, her position in the corporation should have become even more solid and unshakable. Introducing herself as Vice President Scarlett, the girl looked at her new boss. Although she only saw him from behind, she managed to notice his profile and jawline, which resembled the appearance of a Korean idol. Looking at her new boss, Scarlett felt that he seemed vaguely familiar to her. She then repeated her secretary's request to meet with the manager, but President Ye seemed not to hear anything. Seeing that the director had finally turned to Scarlett, the employees were sure that the girl's beauty would literally make his nose bleed. However, Scarlett froze in shock when she recognized the new manager as Ethan, whom she had recently met at a birthday party. The girl fell to her knees in surprise, although just a minute ago she had expected such behavior from the general director. Janet and the other employees were completely confused by their boss's behavior and watched what was happening in amazement. The dark-haired secretary kept her gaze fixed on the CEO's office. She couldn't understand why it was not the president who knelt before Scarlett, but the other way around. At this moment, the head of the Huashen Corporation, Ethan, looked at the girls gathered outside the door. Only after realizing that they had been noticed did the company employees quickly retreat back, trying to disappear from sight as quickly as possible. As if she had lost all her strength, Scarlett continued to sit on the floor and could not utter a word. Ethan also did not understand the reason for the girls' behavior. In his opinion, their meeting did not deserve such a greeting. Meanwhile, Scarlett begged for forgiveness, saying that if it weren't for the Wang family, she would never have allowed herself to insult the leader like that. Sitting down in front of her, the CEO also recalled the events of yesterday and the words about how they were considered lovers. Helping the woman up, Ethan couldn't help but notice the pleasant scent of her perfume and her attractiveness. At the same time, he was not at all surprised by Joshua's feelings for her, recalling the rumors that he was allegedly going to rent the island for Scarlett. Deeply embarrassed, the girl again apologized to the young leader and blushed slightly. After listening to his deputy, the protagonist finally asked her to get to her feet. Scarlett then hurried to close the blinds at the CEO's request to avoid further gossip. Recalling yesterday's events, Ethan repeated her words about his place being in the garbage dump, but today, he was already the head of the Huashen Corporation. Sitting down at the desk, the guy asked what methods the girl was now going to use to cut off his oxygen supply. Scarlett couldn't even imagine that such a person would turn out to be the former son-in-law of the Wang family. However, having admitted her guilt, she stated that she was ready to accept any punishment. Listening to Scarlett, Ethan realized what an unusual person she was. The girl did not panic in the face of difficulties and did not look for excuses. To calm her down, the hero said that he had no intention of firing her. Moreover, Scarlett turned out to be the only person who gave him a chance. According to the hero, if he really were an ordinary poor man, the girl could become his savior. Looking warmly at her boss, Scarlett thanked him and promised to serve him faithfully in the future. However, Ethan then stated in a stern tone that he was ready to forgive the girl, but had no intention of sparing those who had tried to destroy him the day before. The protagonist instructed her to prepare a dossier on everyone who spoke out against him yesterday. The girl suggested that the business world of Yunzhou would soon face serious upheavals due to President Ethan's hunt for his opponents. Half an hour later, the deputy general director placed a folder with a dossier on all the offenders, including Joshua, on the manager's desk. The hero remembered that Ethan could not be compared to Joshua because of his billion-dollar fortune. Then the hero mentioned this first-class clan with huge assets in a conversation with Scarlett. However, Scarlett knew about the decline of the Joshua family, whose assets amounted to about $3 billion, only slightly more than the Wang family's fortune. Then the girls started talking about their request to allocate $70 million. It was possible to return their bribes and suggest that they forget about cooperation. However, Ethan had no intention of mixing personal relationships and business, and instead asked for the Wang family's project plan to be brought to him. When Scarlett was about to carry out the assignment, the CEO asked her to wait, as he wanted to go with her. Meanwhile, Joshua arrived at the Huashen Corporation lobby and hoped to find Ethan being twisted by Vice President Scarlett. Hearing the surprised cry of one of the company's employees, the man looked in her direction, but could not remember the girl. Upset by his inattention, the employee recalled a meeting at a bar where she had treated her to drinks and then had fun with him. Assuming he was too drunk that evening to meet such an ugly woman, Joshua asked where she worked. The man kindly asked to be taken upstairs, explaining that Vice President Scarlett was allegedly in danger. A minute later, finding himself near the office of the company's head, Joshua overheard a conversation between three girls. They were discussing Scarlett, who had fallen to her knees right on the threshold of the office, and then Joshua inquired about the whereabouts of Mrs. Scarlett. Janet replied that the president was in his office, and then asked if Joshua had an appointment with her. Completely ignoring the secretary's words, the man moved forward, wanting to see Vice President Scarlett right away. Throwing open the door to the office where the girl was, Joshua looked ahead. Seeing Ethan, who was calmly sitting in the office, The man immediately called him a thief and a loser who was abandoned by his wife. Joshua began accusing Ethan of hiding in the office to get revenge on Vice President Scarlett. Passing by the girl, the man addressed her as Scarlett's sister and assured her that she had nothing to fear, since he would immediately get rid of the trash. However, he received a slap in the face from Scarlett, who was not going to tolerate such insults towards her boss. The girl claimed that she was not his sister and demanded that he address her exclusively as Vice President Scarlett. Joshua was visibly nervous, continuing to confuse his addresses and calling the girl either sister or vice president. Now, he no longer suspected him of wanting revenge, but was sure that Ethan had come to work for the company as an ordinary security guard. Remembering the gossip he had heard earlier about knees, Joshua imagined a picture of Ethan kneeling in front of Scarlett. Joshua stated that the hero put on an expensive suit early in the morning, came to the girl and asked to become her loyal guard dog. According to Joshua, Scarlett could not possibly agree to something like this, since just yesterday she had promised to completely block all avenues of existence for Ethan. Janet couldn't believe that the vice president was actually trying to destroy the head of her own company. Outraged by Joshua's accusations, the girl slapped him in the face again, categorically denying any such intentions towards the director. Scarlett then ordered the secretary to throw Joshua out of the building so that he would never be in their corporation again. Joshua was seething with indignation, because he, the heir of the Fan family, had already received 2 slaps in the face in front of the man he considered a loser. The man shouted at Ethan that he shouldn't count on a quiet life. He assured that he would still get to him. After leaving the building and continuing to speak rudely about Scarlett, linking her career success to bed, Joshua was already making plans. He dreamed of subduing Ethan and then making the girl crawl on her knees before him while continuing to have fun with her. The man thought about the loser Ethan, who became Scarlett's bodyguard, and then he rushed to tell the news to the Wang family. An hour later, he was already at the Shishan villa. There, Joshua told old Mrs. Wang that Ethan had gotten a job as Scarlett's bodyguard. The relatives could not believe what they heard and loudly expressed their amazement. But Lily was the most shocked of all. Furthermore, Joshua reported that Huashen Corporation employees told stories of Ethan falling to his knees in front of Scarlett. He admitted that Scarlett had feelings for Ethan, which is why she hired him. And then Lily became furious with her ex-husband. She couldn't believe that he dared to kneel before another woman. If he ever fell at her feet, she would forgive him and would neither file for divorce nor go to the police. With a smile on her face, Riley turned to her sister and sarcastically remarked that she simply didn't have enough charm to keep her own husband. She stated that if Ethan were her husband, he would have been kneeling before her from the first day and would even have washed his wife's feet. Lily felt she had been too kind for the last 3 years, and if she had another chance, she would have made him kneel for days. Lily saw Scarlett as someone who had broken her word, so she suggested breaking off the relationship with her completely. For such words, old woman Wang immediately slapped her granddaughter on the cheek. The woman reminded her of the 70 million investments that were in Scarlett's hands, so it was impossible to quarrel with her. Vincent noted that he understood Lily's jealousy perfectly well, but advised her to come to terms with it, since she really was superior to her in grip. Lily's desire to go to Huashen Corporation and personally deal with the offenders only further angered old lady Wang. The woman then turned to her son and asked him to contact Scarlett because she wanted to speak with the vice president personally. During the conversation, Mrs. Wang remarked that she herself would gladly give Ethan to Scarlett, knowing of her sympathy for him. The older woman then reminded him of Scarlett's promise yesterday to support the Wang family and try to block all opportunities for Ethan. Scarlett wanted to apologize for not being able to fulfill her promise, although, in reality, everything was not at all as Mrs. Wang imagined. The old woman stated that she would not mind if Scarlett took Ethan for herself as a gift, as she considered him useless. She held no grudge against Scarlett, but expressed hope that the girl would still be able to fulfill her promise regarding funding. In response, Scarlett said that the manager liked the idea itself, but he wanted to get to know all the details in more detail. Hearing this, old lady Wang was surprised and promised to send Vincent to Huashen Corporation to discuss the project in person. After the conversation ended, Mrs. Wang demanded that her son show his best side in front of the head of the corporation. The man then suggested that the mother stop investigating the watch theft case because of Ethan's collaboration with Scarlett. However, Old Lady Wang ordered the search to continue and demanded that the missing item be found. At this point, Mateo intervened in the conversation and told his grandmother that Ethan had allegedly sold an expensive watch to one of the local bandits. Old Lady Wang called her ex-son-in-law an ordinary dog. Scarlett, even if the family decides to take revenge on Ethan, she still will not protect him. Then the woman looked at Lily and her parents with displeasure. She called the girl's father a useless person and considered her granddaughter stupid. Moreover, Old Lady Wang said that it would be better if Riley had the same beautiful appearance and promiscuity. Hearing these words, the girl immediately turned around and ran away, which greatly surprised her own mother. On the way, Lily continued to insult Ethan. She believed that it was because of him that she had disgraced herself so much in front of her family. And so now she wanted to completely destroy her ex-husband. After some time, Lily arrived at the underground parking lot of Huashen Corporation. There were already other cars parked there, including Scarlett's car. There, the girl noticed Ethan and Vice President Scarlett. They were heading somewhere together. Her ex-husband, whom she now hated so much, had noticeably changed after the divorce and looked like a real dandy. After getting out of the car, Lily immediately began to insult the main character, calling him Scarlett's obedient dog. Turning around, Ethan noticed his ex-wife. But his companion did not understand at all why such an arrogant princess appeared here. Then Lily reminded the hero of the rumors about how he allegedly crawled before Scarlett and begged for forgiveness. According to her, all he had to do was fall at her feet and ask for forgiveness in order to continue to be the Wang family's son-in-law. The protagonist was shocked by such impudence and could not believe that the girl was seriously asking why he did not kneel before her. After all, just 2 days ago, Lily was having fun at the hotel with Joshua, and now she demanded that he crawl on his knees in front of her. The girl was sure that they would have remained husband and wife if Ethan had knelt down then. Recalling the events at the Four Seasons Hotel, Lily claimed that she would not have called the police if her husband had fallen at her feet. However, the hero stated that he would not be ashamed to kneel before his own wife, but not before a dissolute woman. Lily insisted that she was to blame for what was happening, and that she had made a mistake in showing too much kindness to her husband. The protagonist was forced to silently listen to this emotional stream of accusations from his ex-wife. However, suddenly Lily, who continued to speak in a raised voice, received a strong slap in the face. It was Scarlett. The girl shamed Lily, accusing her of cheating on her own husband. Not only did she not repent, but she also dared to open her mouth towards Ethan. Crying from pain and humiliation, Lily pressed her palm to her cheek and looked at Scarlett with bitterness. Now it seemed to her that this woman had not only taken her husband away from her, but had also raised her hand against her. Placing his hand on his deputy's shoulder, Ethan asked her to forget about everything and not continue the quarrel. The new corporation president then turned to Lily and urged her to leave, reminding her that he was no longer her man. However, the girl did not give up. She offered Ethan to leave Scarlett. If she paid him $200,000, then she was ready to offer $500,000. Hearing this, Ethan involuntarily coughed, and Scarlett laughed at her rival's attempt to lure him with the sum of $500,000. Still laughing, she said that even if Lily added another zero to the sum, it still wouldn't be enough. Lily doubted that the bodyguards were paid $200,000, and if they were really talking about $5 million, then Scarlett had gone crazy. However, the girl grabbed Ethan's hand again and told him that Mateo had managed to find evidence of the sale of the watch. Lily added that if Ethan had listened to her, left Scarlett and become her bodyguard, she would have asked Mateo to spare him. Turning his back to the girl, Ethan thanked her for such generosity but refused to become her bodyguard. The hero emphasized that he had no intention of protecting his ex-wife's peace while she spent time in other people's beds and hotel rooms. Sitting behind the wheel of a luxury car, the guy suggested that the Wang family go to court if they really had evidence. As the car pulled away, Lily almost ran after it, demanding that Ethan stop. But her attempts were to no avail. The girl was convinced that Scarlett clearly did not pay Ethan $5 million for security. In her opinion, he received money for the role of a lover. At the same time, the girl could not understand how she was worse than Scarlett. Meanwhile, we find ourselves on Yunzhou 7th Street, known for its slums and the highest crime rate in the city. Every local bandit knew the saying that order or chaos in Yunzhou was determined by Brother Watermelon and his men. There, Mateo greeted a man nicknamed Brother Watermelon and called him Master. The man, covered in tattoos, met Mr. Wang and apologized for not being able to meet him earlier. After greetings, Mateo offered to make a deal with his brother Arbuz and showed him a box containing a Richard Mille watch worth over 5 million. Opening the lid, the young man showed off the watch and said that he was ready to part with it at a reduced price of 4.5 million. Mateo then asked his old acquaintance not to tell anyone about the purchase of an expensive watch, and he stated that the seller was a certain Ethan. Brother Watermelon looked closely at his interlocutor, noticed the bruises under his eyes, and assumed that they were left by that same Ethan. He called Ethan his uncle's parasite, and although the family didn't want a scandal, the guy felt he had to send his former son-in-law to prison. Remembering Mr. Liu's advice not to interfere in other people's family quarrels, Brother Watermelon refused to participate in this matter. Then Mateo said that Ethan had already been kicked out of the family. He didn't understand why Watermelon listened so much to some Liu. However, one of the bandits sharply demanded that the guest shut his mouth and reminded him that Mr. Liu was the head of their gang. Calling Mr. Liu his mentor, without whom he himself would not exist, Arbuz emphasized that his boss's word was law for him. However, the guy was not going to back down and offered his brother Arbuz to buy an elite watch for 4 million. Rising from the sofa, the master of the house, with a smile, once again reminded him of his loyalty to Mr. Liu, whom he could not disobey. Then Mateo, who never gave up on his intentions, named the sum of 3 million, noting that Arbuz would immediately earn 2 million net. After this, Brother Watermelon declared that heaven and earth were, of course, important, but money was most important, and he decided to take on the guest's case. Meanwhile, during the trip, Ethan ordered Scarlett not to touch Lily again without his personal permission. The vice president took these words as pity for her ex-wife and reminded her boss of all the girl's vile actions. She was surprised that he didn't hate her, but the protagonist explained that hatred was just the other side of love. After these words, Ethan seemed to Scarlett like the heir to a great family, whose views and thoughts were impossible to fully understand. To the girl, he appeared to be a handsome and rich man with deep convictions, who treated women kindly and generously. Then the vice president thought that if Lily couldn't appreciate such a person, then she herself would gladly pay attention to him. After visiting the Jinj temple, the leaders discussed the Wang family's plans to build a luxury mansion in the area. Ethan explained that this project was the Wang family's investment plan, which required funding from Huasheng. In Scarlett's opinion, it was the perfect place, with beautiful gardens, a forest of red maples, picnic areas, and hot springs. During the walk, the girl asked why the boss wanted to invest money in such a good project after everything the Wang family had done. When the hero claimed the idea as his own, Scarlett suspected that the Wang family had simply stolen his design. Ethan replied that the Wangs were obsessed with entering the Yunzhou elite. But after Lily's grandfather died, they only argued over the inheritance. That's why he came up with a way to allow them to enter high society without increasing the family's influence by building a residential complex. Having received this proposal from her husband, Lily told everything to old Mrs. Wang, who approved the idea and passed the project on to her son, Vincent. Scarlett was well aware of the Van family's favor towards Vincent's branch, and attributed this to patriarchal traditions. Recalling the Wang family's treatment of Lily, Ethan thought about the pressure her relatives put on her and how she was forced to marry. However, in Scarlett's opinion, even this could not justify cheating on her husband. At that moment, a maple leaf fell on the girl's head, and the hero carefully removed it. Then Ethan suddenly offered her a drink. Meanwhile, people were walking in the city center. Lily also came here to forget. Sitting at the cocktail and snack bar, Lily invited a girl named Sydney to join her. Surprised by her friend's desire to drink in broad daylight, Sydney inquired about the reason for her resentment and promised to deal with the culprits. Talking about Scarlett, Lily complained that she only scolded her husband and did not even lay a finger on her rival. But for some reason, she hit her. Unable to contain her emotions, the girl burst into tears and did not understand who this Scarlett was to her ex-husband. Sydney called her friend's ex-husband Scarlett's dog and said she would not tolerate such insults directed at him. Lily herself did not see a problem in her betrayal of her husband, since it happened only once, Almost all girls did the same. Sydney almost choked on her drink at the reminder of her 2 previous affairs. She was a little indignant at her friend's interference in her personal life, and reminded her that her husband had never caught her red-handed. Lily didn't understand why he went to Scarlett, humiliated himself in front of her, and became her bodyguard, although she could also pay him. However, Sydney, who knew Ethan's story well, explained that over the course of 3 years he had fallen in love with his wife too much and could not simply stop loving her. Hearing this, Lily was surprised by her friend's words that her husband's refusal and his departure for Scarlett were an attempt to make her respect herself. While he was living on his wife's money, he felt like a gigolo. But as soon as he started earning money on his own, he was able to straighten his shoulders. Sydney believed that Ethan wanted to succeed and then marry Lily again. After listening to her friend, Lily seemed to see the light and completely agreed with her words. Smiling contentedly, the girl thought that her ex-husband, whom everyone considered a loser, was still in love with her. When Sydney proposed to marry Joshua, Lily refused. He was incapable of caring for her the way Ethan did. Then her friend pointed out that it was always possible to get a divorce and get her ex-husband back, and Lily called her a villain in a joking tone. Remembering that Ethan had been a domestic worker, Sydney couldn't understand why he had been working as a courier for the past 6 months. Lily said that during the family's trip to Switzerland, Ethan became ill and began working hard to earn money for medicine. However, suddenly her phone rang. Mateo asked her to come to her grandmother immediately, as evidence had been found that Ethan had sold her grandfather's expensive watch. The next day, when Ethan arrived at the Huasheng Corporation office, all the employees nearby politely greeted the CEO. Hearing the phone ring, the protagonist picked up the device and was surprised to see that it was Mateo calling him. He asked the guy to come immediately to Grandma Wang's house, since he had found evidence of the sale of the watch. Ethan declined, citing his busy schedule. However, Mateo said that he invited the man who allegedly bought the watch from him and urged his former son-in-law to show courage and meet him. Surprised by Mateo's ability to find a false witness, the hero decided to come to Mrs. Wang. Although he was not selling the watch, he wanted to close this issue. After finishing the conversation, the CEO noticed Janet's secretary and asked if she knew how to drive. The girl immediately agreed when the boss asked her to take him to Shishan Villa. Soon, they were already driving towards the country mansion. Looking at the scenery flashing by outside the window, the hero experienced mixed feelings about returning to the villa as president. 30 minutes later, the car carrying Ethan and Secretary Janet entered the Shishan Villa grounds. Janet was the first to get out of the car, immediately attracting the attention of everyone present. Knowing her as Scarlett's right-hand woman, Samantha was puzzled that the secretary was driving the car herself. Having opened the car door, the secretary informed the corporation's CEO of her arrival at the location. Once outside, Ethan asked his subordinate to wait for him here until all his business was completed, and the girl obediently nodded in agreement. Seeing this scene, Old Lady Wang and her daughter were shocked that Janet was acting as a driver for their former son-in-law. The hero's ex-wife was no less surprised and did not understand at all how this could have happened. Mateo stepped forward and laughed, thinking that Ethan was acting like an important person. Although he had recently been a poor courier, Grandmother agreed with Mateo, as did Samantha, who found the young man's behavior funny and provocative. Mateo noted that he hired a secretary only to drive the car and open doors for him. Then Ethan was once again convinced of the character flaws of the Wang family members, which only the grave could correct. He then looked at his ex-wife and was surprised to see a smile on her face. Lily decided that Ethan joined the corporation for the sake of success and the desire to prove his love to his wife. In the opinion of the protagonist, all these people had sawdust instead of brains, so he immediately asked about the witness. After this, Mateo invited him to follow him, and the men headed through the large grounds of the country villa. However, upon opening the door of the room where Mateo had led him, Ethan saw several bandits with bats in their hands. Surprised by the appearance of criminals on the territory of the villa, the hero noticed the people of Brother Arbuz. The bandits immediately greeted him, and then the guy asked about the reason for their appearance. Arbul recalled that just a few days ago, he allegedly came personally to sell him the watch, and he paid 5 million for it. Since almost every schoolchild in Yunzhou knew Brother Watermelon, Mateo was surprised that Ethan pretended not to understand him. Turning to Mateo, Ethan noted with irony that the appearance of such a witness was quite in keeping with his style. Old Lady Wang approached and was amazed by Ethan's persistence, who continued to deny stealing the watch. The hero explained that he had come only to once again declare his innocence and confirm that he had not taken her watch. Taking the watch box in her hands, Mrs. Wang demanded to know how it ended up in Brother Arbuz's hands. It was a limited edition. Then Brother Arbuz began to convince everyone that it was Ethan who sold him the watch, and that he spent the proceeds on renting the presidential suite. The man then wondered where Ethan got the money for the hotel if he didn't get $5 million for the watch. Wanting to talk to people like human beings, Ethan was met with only ridicule and coldness in response. Then he decided to lay his cards on the table and introduced himself as the president of the corporation. When he announced that he was a billionaire, everyone present fell silent and stared at him. However, the very next second, almost everyone burst into laughter, with the only exception being old lady Wang. Mateo laughed at Ethan as if he imagined himself as Van Doy from the famous comedy, even repeating lines from the film. Riley, following her brother, declared that she was ready to marry him and even promised to take turns serving Ethan. Brother Watermelon then asked Ethan to stop fooling around and suggested that he kneel down and bow to Madame Wang without fear of prison. Reflecting back on their 3 years of marriage, Lily noted that her family remembered their past feelings, and that was why they were not going to send him to prison. The girl even offered him the opportunity to work it all off. But now he had to get down on his knees and ask for forgiveness. Ethan replied that he had done nothing wrong to anyone and had no intention of kneeling. Then Samantha demanded that the police be called and the useless parasite be jailed for 10 years. However, if it had reached the police, the whole scheme that Mateo had organized would have collapsed instantly. Then Brother Watermelon said that today Ethan would kneel. He was ready to achieve this by force and gave the corresponding order to his henchmen. One of the bandits grabbed the hero by the arm, and the second demanded that Ethan immediately kneel. But the protagonist declared that the Wang family was unworthy of seeing such a thing with his participation. While one of the attackers hesitated, Ethan knocked out his accomplice with a powerful blow, who was trying to force him to bow. The guy then quickly knocked the first opponent off balance, knocking him to the ground. Ethan turned out to be not such a simpleton as those around him thought. And then Watermelon demanded that all the bandits attack him at once. Suddenly, a white dog, which was often seen next to Madame Wang, appeared in front of the villains. She barked loudly and stood in front of Ethan, protecting him from the attackers. Carefully lifting the animal into his arms, the hero recognized Hua Hua, the old woman's beloved dog, whom he had looked after all these years. Ethan understood that this dog was much better than people, who sometimes behaved worse than pigs. However, the old woman ordered that Hua Hua be returned to her. Then Riley walked up to the man and took the dog. The woman then gave Ethan one last chance to repent and kneel. Surrounded by criminals, the protagonist repeated again that no one present was worthy of seeing him on his knees. 4 years ago, a year after Ethan became the Wang family's son-in-law, his relatives sent him to Syria for combat training. It was thanks to this experience that he could now deal with his enemies without any difficulty. To ordinary people, the opponents the hero was now fighting might have seemed like professionals. However, for a man who had fought for a whole year among blood and corpses, these fighters were just children. It seemed that all the attackers had already been defeated, but behind Ethan there remained another criminal, preparing to attack. Without wasting any time, the bandit pounced on the young man, grabbed him by the chest and tried to immobilize him. Then another criminal approached him and demanded that he hold him down so that he could stab him. Brother Arbuz, who was watching what was happening, lowered his head and dreamed of destroying the guy for his beaten subordinates. However, to everyone's surprise, Ethan headbutted the attacker who was holding him down, then threw the criminal aside. After this, with eyes burning with anger, he again attacked his enemies. Meanwhile, Old Lady Wang remembered her late husband. Now it seemed to her that he knew perfectly well how good Ethan could fight, since he was so insistent on his marriage to Lily. Probably the grandfather wanted to provide his granddaughter with protection, although the girl herself lived in a peaceful time and had no enemies. Vincent then noted that his father had initially wanted to offer Ethan to his family, but Vincent was now glad that he had refused that offer back then. He said that his father initially wanted to bring Riley and Ethan together, but that was not the case. But upon learning that Ethan was a simple country boy, the man refused and eventually handed him over to Lily. Riley laughed at her grandfather's decision, since she had no use for a savage who was used to solving everything with his fists. Happy to have escaped such a fate, The girl suggested that her sister enjoy this happiness on her own. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to fight criminals and did not even suspect that there were such details of his past. Returning from combat training 3 years ago and having seen enough blood and death, the boy desperately dreamed of love and home comfort. He fell in love with Lily at first sight and dreamed of spending his whole life next to this beautiful and gentle girl. Standing among the defeated bandits lying on the floor, the hero involuntarily reflected on how everything had turned out exactly this way. At that moment, Brother Watermelon screamed in fear as Ethan suddenly grabbed his hand. Experiencing unbearable pain from the iron grip, he screamed and could not free himself. Then Ethan demanded that the bandit immediately explain the reason for the accusations of stealing the watch and name the person who gave such an order. However, Watermelon stated that he lived by his own principles and was not afraid of death. Ethan could kill him if he had the courage, but then he would regret it. Mateo demanded that the hero stop because he did not want to see a murder in his grandmother's house. Ethan, once again claiming he had not stolen anything, suggested that his relatives contact the police if they had evidence. He also demanded that they stop telling stories about how they were handing him over to the authorities solely for his own good. Suddenly, Hua Hua the dog appeared in Ethan's path again, pitifully asking to be picked up. Ignoring Mateo's cries, the hero declared that he would only like to take her from the whole family. Mateo asked his father if they were just going to let him go, and his father replied that they had to do it another way. After inquiring about the condition of Arbuz's brother, who was leaving with his people, Mateo began to think about how to cover up the incident. After yelling at Mateo for having to fight that bastard Ethan, Brother Watermelon demanded $1 million for the treatment of his people. Having got into the car, Arbuz promised his friend that he would definitely get even with Ethan, after which he said goodbye. He was outraged by the public humiliation from Ethan, who almost broke his arm, and decided not to let it go unanswered. Meanwhile, at the meeting, Ethan announced the start of cooperation with the Dinshin Company. He instructed Scarlett to contact the Wang family so that they could send a representative to discuss the project. At the same time, at the Shishan Villa, representatives of the Wang family continued to discuss their affairs. Vincent told his mother that the head of the Huashen Corporation had agreed to invest $70 million. His mother demanded that he give his all and impress President Yi, as the Wang family had already cooperated with them many times. Feeling a touch on his shoulder, Vincent jumped and saw Riley, who had stated her desire to go with her father. The girl explained that she had heard about the president's youth and attractiveness, which was completely different from the older leaders. Lily reminded her that the president was busy, and besides, no matter how handsome he was supposedly already in a relationship with Scarlett. Riley countered that they weren't married yet, and that she was younger than Scarlett and had a better figure, so she could easily steal him away. Mateo fully supported his sister, and Old Lady Van agreed with her reasoning. The rare, worthy men needed to be conquered. Upon hearing her grandmother's order to go to meet the president with her father, Riley cried out in joy and thanked her. A frustrated Lily also wanted to go, reminding everyone that it was she who had proposed the luxury residential complex project. Riley then sarcastically called her sister a divorcee and advised her not to count on the attention of the head of the corporation. Old Lady Wang supported her granddaughter. Although she admitted that Lily was more beautiful, the woman still wanted to introduce President Ye to Riley. At the same time, the grandmother suggested that Lily focus on Joshua, and Riley confidently declared that she would definitely win the president's love. An hour later, Secretary Janet opened the door to the president's office and announced the arrival of Vincent and his daughter. While continuing to work on the paperwork, Ethan asked the employee to tell the guests to wait in the reception area. Without even raising his head, the protagonist specifically ordered that under no circumstances should tea be served to visitors. While the guests waited for the reception, Riley was outraged that her father forced her to wear a closed dress with a single slit on the thigh. According to Vincent, if the girl had come to the first meeting in too revealing an outfit, the president would have considered her frivolous. The daughter thanked her father for the advice and promised to take the director away from Scarlett, while Vincent himself was already counting on becoming the head of the clan. Continuing to wait, the father and daughter did not even receive tea after 10 minutes and began to express outrage at the corporation's attitude towards guests. Then Riley opened the door to the secretary's office and asked the employee to bring them 2 cups of tea. 10 minutes later, Riley was already very angry and complaining that the secretary still hadn't brought anything. The father sitting next to her asked his daughter to calm down. He reminded her that after her wedding with the president, she would be able to fire her secretary. Hearing her father's remark, the girl really did quickly come to her senses and even smiled. However, after another half hour, she began to complain that she could no longer sit in the pose of a noble lady, and the president still had not appeared. In Vincent's opinion, the head of the corporation had no respect for the guests at all, since he made them wait in the reception area for a whole hour. Suddenly, the president of the Huashen Corporation appeared in a suit behind the half-open door. Ethan was well aware of the younger Riley's free-spirited behavior at home, but he was surprised by how she acted in public. In all 3 years, the main character saw a girl in traditional dress for the first time and still did not notice a drop of femininity in her. At the same time, Riley herself did not dress up for Ethan at all. She still considered him unworthy not only of herself, but even of Lily. Still mistaking Ethan for a regular company security guard, Vincent asked him where the CEO was. Noticing that the guest still had no idea who was standing in front of him, Ethan offered to tell him the details of the luxury residential complex project. However, the man only called him a pathetic bodyguard who only knew how to swing his fists and who didn't understand anything about business. Taking this behavior as an unwillingness to have a normal conversation, Ethan decided to simply return to his office. Riley quickly walked up to Ethan and grabbed his shoulder, asking him to stop as she was about to ask him some questions. Since the guy had been with Scarlett for 3 days, the girl believed that he should have known about her connection with President E. You could tell the young man really did know something, and those words gave Riley hope. The girl really wanted to know how close the relationship was between the company president and Scarlett, as well as where exactly they spent their nights. Knowing Riley as a gossip lover, Ethan decided to take advantage of this to stop the talk. So he announced their breakup. The protagonist's words about the breakup between the corporation's president and Scarlett sounded like a bolt from the blue for Vincent and his daughter. However, the man then thanked the heavens for such luck. Riley also laughed, and Ethan could not understand the reason for such wild delight. Sitting down in the chair, Mrs. Wang's granddaughter continued to smile as if she already had a premonition of her victory. At first, she called the boy Ethan, but then she claimed that he was just a younger Ethan, since he had the same last name as the head of the company. Vincent stated that his boss was President E, and the director's future wife was supposed to be the hero's former sister-in-law. The Wang family was planning to intermarry with the Ye family, and then, as Vincent dreamed, Ethan would again be under the control of his former relatives. When the guy asked why Riley was sure the president was reciprocating her feelings, the girl said that men couldn't resist her. Suspecting that it was President Ye who gave her grandmother a bracelet worth 10 million, Riley considered him her secret admirer. Surprised by her self-confidence, Ethan asked her not to doubt it, since the bracelet had indeed been a gift from the president of the corporation. Still not completely believing it, the girl asked again about this gift, and immediately praised her own intuition, which had never failed her. Looking at her father's laughing face, Riley told him about the corporation's president, who allegedly had an interest in her. Vincent already saw himself as the father-in-law of the head of a large company, and was extremely pleased with this prospect. From the outside, Ethan found this whole family extremely unpleasant. They dreamed in vain of becoming related to the E family. Riley then asked where President Ye was, and the guy replied that he was in the reception area discussing business with visitors. He said there was a man there who looked at people like they were trash, and with him was his daughter, dressed like a call girl. Not understanding the hint, the girl insulted her unknown rival, calling her behavior shameless, and even intended to deal with her. However, Vincent stopped his daughter and demanded that she not worry, so as not to ruin her first impression in front of President E. The disgruntled man told his daughter to continue waiting and asked Ethan to inform them immediately as soon as the president was free. 5 minutes later, Secretary Janet conveyed to Mr. Wang President Ye's request to return home as he was away on business. The irritated guests couldn't believe what they heard, and Vincent was the most shocked of all. The secretary did not know when exactly the president would be free, and therefore demanded that the visitors leave the premises. However, Vincent was not worried because he was sure that it was the head of the corporation who gave the bracelet. Then, he asked his mother to gather the whole family. Meanwhile, at the family villa, Lily was surprised by another family meeting and asked if the contract had already been signed. However, Riley hardly thought about the agreement and was in a hurry to share her joy. Relatives were shocked by the news that it was President Ye who gave his grandmother a jade bracelet worth 10 million. Hearing this, Lily was finally convinced that Ethan could not possibly have given such an expensive gift. Jonathan didn't see anything special in this, and Samantha recalled the previous relationship between President E and Scarlett. Vincent then told the family about the breakup between President E and Scarlett. It was obvious to Riley that the president had given the bracelet to her grandmother precisely because of her beauty, especially since Lily had not yet divorced Ethan. Old Lady Wong found this explanation logical. Only a man in love with Riley could give such an expensive gift. The girl promised her grandmother that she would cling to the director with a death grip and would definitely help the family enter high society. However, Lily doubted the credibility of the source of information about the bracelet. Riley said that President Ye was busy in the morning, so she was planning to go to the office alone after lunch to discuss the contract. Riley then added that if necessary, she would ask Lily to be her personal driver and take her to the corporate office. Humiliated by such words in front of the whole family, Lily shouted that she was busy and had no intention of driving anyone. Samantha rushed after her angry daughter, trying to stop her, but she had already run away. Already sitting behind the wheel of her car, the girl continued to repeat insults directed at her hated rival. The car was racing at high speed, and only at the last moment did Lily notice a large tree right in front of her. The next moment, the car crashed into the fence at full speed. Continuing to shout words of hatred, the girl burst into tears and blamed Ethan for the accident, believing that it was because of him that she had been so disgraced. Meanwhile, in the Huashan Corporation office, Ethan was busy signing documents. Picking up the ringing phone, the guy heard Lily's irritated voice, insulting him and declaring her hatred. Continuing to shower him with reproaches, Lily did not understand why he did not play his role to the end. In her opinion, if he had not pretended from the very beginning and told her family the truth, he would not have put her in such a humiliating position. Ethan noted that he always told the truth, but the problem was the Wang family, who simply did not want to believe him. Then Lily said that the whole family was convinced that the head of the corporation had fallen in love with Riley. Her grandmother constantly praised her. In response to his ex-wife's complaints, the hero asked if her precious young master Fan was still with her. Lily then stated that Joshua could not compete with President Ye since he was not even the head of his family company. However, the girl stated that Joshua was 1,000 times better than him, even if he did not reach the level of President E. In her opinion, Joshua was a benefit to the family, while Ethan was a disgrace. And now she had to deal with the consequences of his actions. Considering his ex-wife stupid, the protagonist threatened to end the conversation because he had too much to do. Then the girl asked him not to hang up, explaining that she had one request. After listening to Lily, the hero asked what exactly she wanted. Ethan was completely confused by her desire to help Riley succeed in her relationship with the corporation's president. Then Lily asked him to put a laxative in Riley's black tea or accidentally bump into her and rip her dress. The hero promised to help, but explained that this was not the problem at all, since the president simply had no intention of receiving the guest. Then the girl demanded that he stop deceiving her. Ethan worked as a security guard, so the president definitely wouldn't listen to him. Having advised her not to believe her own fantasies, the guy ended the conversation, which caused a new wave of indignation in Lily. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Riley went back up to the president's floor and asked Janet, the secretary, to take her to her boss. After apologizing to the visitor, the secretary stated that the president did not want to meet Riley because of her beauty. During the negotiations, he did not pay attention to the project and thought only about her, so he asked to send another representative of the family. Riley couldn't believe what she heard and thought President Ye had called her beautiful. Janet mentioned that the president had watched her videos, and she finally convinced herself that she was the object of his secret affection. Having promised to send another person, Riley asked to convey to the president an offer to go to a movie or have coffee together. And then, suddenly, Riley took out money from her blue purse. The girl just wanted to get photos of the corporation's president from a company employee. Having refused the money, the secretary explained that she did not have a single photograph of President E. Then, leaning towards the guest, she added in a whisper that her boss was incredibly handsome and, moreover, about the same age as her. After saying goodbye to Riley, Janet smiled sweetly at her, but thought that her guest was a curvy but extremely dim-witted girl. Meanwhile, we find ourselves in the city of Man, located in the country of tea. While pouring a drink into Brother Watermelon's glass, Charles Liu became intrigued by the unexpected visit from Yun Zhou. Unable to hide anything from Mr. Liu, Brother Watermelon told him about the new problems in Yunzhou. He admitted that he came to ask for help. After hearing the details, Charles smashed a glass over his interlocutor's head, since out of almost 80 people, he had only 10 left. Then Arbuz asked to be forgiven for his uselessness and declared that he was ready to personally bear any punishment from Mr. Liu. Lighting a cigar, Charles advised him to forget about what had happened. Times had changed, and there was no longer any point in waving his fists. They were the ones who lived in darkness and had no place under the sun. He had long since left Yunzhou and moved to the poor areas of Southeast Asia. However, the bandits still asked for 100 men to be provided to him in order to take revenge. Before making the call, Charles recalled Arbuz's orphaned childhood and noted that he owed everything he had achieved in life to Mr. Fan. Brother Watermelon realized that they were talking about the same legendary authority who had once helped Mr. Liu achieve success. While talking about his upcoming trip to Yunzhou and his intention to visit Mr. Fan, Liu unexpectedly learned that he was already in the city. Charles remarked that Watermelon was a very lucky man, as Mr. Fan was currently in Yunzhou. Hearing this, Watermelon wanted to go with him, but Liu hit him again and said that he was not an important enough figure. After this, Liu ordered Watermelon to book the tickets. He was going to not only meet with Fan, but also deal with a certain Ethan. After hearing the order, Brother Watermelon was sincerely happy, hoping to finally get rid of his enemy. Meanwhile, Vincent still couldn't stop thinking about Riley's words about President Ye not meeting with her precisely because of her beauty. The man was absolutely sure that the head of the corporation was in love with his daughter. Since President Ye had asked for another person to be sent to him, the Wang family sent Mateo to him the next day. Meanwhile, he received a message that Ethan would soon regret his birth. Then Mateo looked forward to meeting the enemy with joy. Meanwhile, the guests who arrived in Yunzhou were received in the large and spacious villa of Mr. Fan. Charles and the young man standing next to him bowed respectfully to the owner of the house. However, Mr. Fan, who was sitting in the chair, demanded that they stop bowing, since Liu himself was already a big boss. Charles then admitted that he had never forgotten his kindness. But at the same time, he did not understand why his benefactor had returned to Yunzhou after living in England. Holding a cup of coffee in his hand, Mr. Fan mentioned the old master who had sent him to help the third young master. Liu couldn't imagine that he was in the city, because he knew him as a true master, standing even higher than Mr. Fan himself. Fan ordered his guest to keep an eye on his men so that they did not get underfoot, and warned that he would punish him if they disturbed his master. After this, Liu asked to see the young master's appearance, fearing that his men might accidentally cross the path of such an important person. Then the servant placed a photograph in front of them, and Fan told them that he was undergoing a test and demanded that they not interfere in his affairs. Taking the photograph in his hands, Charles carefully studied the image of the mysterious young man. But Charles wanted to know more about him. Then Mr. Fan said that the guy would stay in Yunzhou for another 2 years, and then did not understand the reasons for Charles's return. He said that Brother Arbuz had encountered problems, so he came here with his people to help his relative. Then Mr. Fan again demanded that he not create problems for the third young master. Immediately understanding everything, Liu began to bow respectfully to the owner of the house, and the latter offered him a game of chess, wanting to evaluate his skills. Meanwhile, Mateo, who had been sitting in the reception room for 2 hours, was indignant at the president's reluctance to receive him. He considered this attitude too cold towards his future relative and decided to find out everything through Ethan. Hearing the phone ring, the protagonist picked up his smartphone and noted with extreme displeasure that it was Mateo calling him. 5 minutes later, Ethan came into the reception room and asked the guest what he wanted. In response, Mateo demanded to know where the president was. Then the hero, with a touch of irony, explained that the head of the corporation was busy talking to a feeble-minded person. The guest laughed and declared that this visitor had indeed wasted the corporation's manager's time. Then Mateo asked him why he was acting so arrogant, while remaining just a pathetic bodyguard. He then recalled how Ethan had beaten him in front of the influential people of Yunzhou and promised to never forget it. In response, the protagonist recalled Watermelon's brother's attempt to take revenge on him, but Mateo asked him not to rejoice prematurely. The hero involuntarily thought about Scarlet, with whom he rode to work every day, and did not want the bandits to harm her. Deciding to end it immediately, the guy suggested to Mateo that they invite all the villains to the underground parking lot and not make them wait near the office. Mateo was about to order Brother Watermelon to gather the men, hoping to test whether Ethan had the courage to wait for them there. Soon, the men found themselves in an underground parking lot where the cars of Huashen Corporation employees were located. The CEO watched in amazement as Mateo paced nervously back and forth across the parking lot. Then he boasted with an evil laugh that he had destroyed the surveillance cameras in advance, so there would be no evidence left. These words only pleased the protagonist. He decided not to hold back, since if Mateo died, there would be no evidence left either. Frightened, Mateo did not understand what his opponent was planning. However, he soon received several more strong blows to the face. Ethan thought he was an idiot and wasn't going to wait for an attack after he brought the bandits to attack him. It was only when the beaten Mateo was grabbed by the collar that a cry was heard demanding that young Master Wong be released immediately. Brother Watermelon ordered his men to quickly capture Ethan. The hero was left alone against several strong criminals, ready to pounce on him and kill him at any moment. The first bandit who rushed forward immediately received a powerful blow to the face, and Ethan threw the second one back with a strong kick. 10 opponents did indeed pose a certain danger, and Mateo even threatened to make the guy disabled. Brother Watermelon suggested that Ethan stop resisting, saying that he could not cope with the professionals. The villain then promised to spare him if he would kneel and call him elder brother, but the hero again declared that they were unworthy of this. Meanwhile, Brother Watermelon contacted Mr. Liu and asked him to send 10 more fighters, since his people would not be able to hold out. Charles became intrigued by the unknown master, who could fight against 10 people at once, and wanted to see him in person. 10 minutes later, Charles arrived at the Huashen Corporation's underground parking lot to help his subordinates. The frightened Brother Arbuz was delighted by the long-awaited appearance of his older comrade, who promised support. The bandit immediately began to complain and claim that from the very beginning 100 fighters should have been brought in to eliminate Ethan. Taking one look at the boy, Mr. Liu ordered him to move away. He was clearly not happy to see him. Charles really wanted to get a good look at the famous Ethan in action. Although the hero fought off 10 bandits, he had used up almost all his strength, and if another 10 opponents had appeared, he would have been in trouble. After taking a look at the group of villains, Ethan decided to capture the gang leader. But first, he was going to deal with Mr. Liu himself. Meanwhile, Mateo laughed and stated that Ethan shouldn't have crossed Mr. Liu. Suddenly, Charles froze in horror as he finally got a good look at the young man in front of him. Recognizing him as Mr. Ye, he could barely speak. But Mateo, who was standing next to him, continued to demand that Mr. Liu kill Ethan. To the complete amazement of those around him, Mateo received a powerful blow from Mr. Liu and almost flew to the side. Pressing his hand to his face, which was reddened from the blow, the boy did not understand this attitude towards himself at all. The next moment, Charles knelt down in front of Ethan and bowed respectfully to the young master. The head of the Asian group immediately introduced himself as Mr. Fan's man. Ethan immediately recognized the man, who asked to be punished, admitting that even 100 deaths would not be enough to atone for his guilt. Shocked by Mr. Liu's words, Mateo continued to call Ethan the poor son-in-law of the Wang family and did not understand why they bowed down to him. Then Charles demanded that Brother Watermelon immediately kneel before the young master. After grabbing him, Mr. Liu ordered him to bow 100 times. If even one bow was not deep enough, he would start all over again. Following orders, Brother Watermelon called himself a blind idiot and begged to be forgiven for his stupidity and inability to see the obvious. Mateo, still not understanding what was happening, could not comprehend when exactly Ethan became the boss of Watermelon's brother and his entire gang. Ethan then ordered Brother Watermelon to stop banging his forehead on the ground and explain to the Wang family that he never sold him the watch. Wanting to tell the truth, the bandit pointed to Mateo, saying that it was he who had organized this whole setup. After this, Lord Liu ordered his men to seize Mateo and immediately throw him into the river for trying to slander the young master. Falling to his knees and almost crying, Mateo began to beg his former son-in-law to save him from the bandits, reminding him of their relationship. However, Ethan turned away in disgust, and then Mateo even promised to put a drunken Lily and her sister Riley in his bed. Ethan only kicked him in response, shocked that he was willing to use his own sisters to save himself. When Mateo, captured by the bandits, began to beg for help again, Ethan still ordered him to be released this time. In exchange, Mateo had to, upon returning home, tell his family in detail how exactly he had framed his former son-in-law. The repentant man immediately promised to do everything without exception and literally jumped up from the spot. After thanking Ethan, Mr. Liu introduced himself as Charles, Mr. Fan's man, and said that he had brought 100 fighters from Asia for him. However, the hero ordered him to take the people away, noting that in the future he could still use their help if necessary. Back at the Shishan villa, Mateo faced questions from his family about the bruises and abrasions on his face. He then claimed that he had simply driven carelessly and had an accident. Unwilling to reveal Ethan's connections to influential gangsters, Mateo told his grandmother and uncle only that he had framed his former son-in-law. However, Old Lady Wang did not see any particular tragedy in what happened. She did not consider Ethan a holy man and continued to suspect him. The old lady then asked if her grandson had managed to meet President Ye at the Huasheng Corporation office. She indignantly stated that President Ye thought too highly of himself and seemed to expect her to come to him personally to bow. Then Lily asked permission to go to Huasheng herself, since she was the one developing the project together with Ethan. Riley reminded them that the whole family was trying to meet the head of the corporation, so her sister shouldn't think too much of herself. However, having given Lily her consent, her grandmother did not object to her initiative, which caused a new attack of indignation in her second granddaughter. Old Lady Wang said that if Lily also returned empty-handed, she would personally go to President Ye, and the Wang family was obligated to sign a contract. 2 hours after the family conversation, Lily entered the lobby of the corporate office. She asked Secretary Janet if President Yi had been in. Since the manager was busy at the time, Janet asked Ms. Wang to wait in the reception area and then brought her a drink. When Lily received the glass, she discovered that it was warm water with honey. Sitting down in the chair, she couldn't help but remember how, for 3 years, her ex-husband Ethan had brought her the same glass of honey water every day. Meanwhile, in the president's office, Scarlett stood in front of Ethan and reported on Lily's arrival. The protagonist had already sent Vincent, Riley, and Mateo out the door. If he had sent Lily home as well, the family would have thought they were being bullied. However, since the corporation was still going to cooperate with the Vans, they could get their millions. After this, Ethan ordered Scarlett to bring the cooperation agreement and began to wait for her return in his office. Ethan then opened the door slightly to look at the guest who was so eager to get to the meeting with the CEO. Seeing her ex-husband, Lily looked at him with fear. The hero himself noted that Lily used to always wear similar clothes at home, and then she seemed homey, cozy, sweet, and beautiful. Since President Ye was very busy, the girl didn't expect to see him anytime soon, so she asked Ethan to keep her company. However, the main character was busy with work and did not see any common topics for conversation with Lily. Ethan then handed the girl the contract and informed her that she should read it and sign it if she was satisfied with the terms. In that case, the Wang family would receive 70 million, paid in 3 tranches over the course of a week. Taking the document, Lily was surprised that President Ye immediately agreed to implement the project. Opening the folder, the girl became noticeably nervous when she saw the inscription, "First Class Lily," on the back cover. Then she looked at Ethan, not understanding why the project was given that name. At that moment, she suddenly remembered the events of 6 months ago. Then Ethan created the concept for the future project, and it was he who suggested the name First Class Lily. The hero came up with all this for the sake of his beloved wife and was going to implement the project even with his own funds. It was a gift for the woman he loved, and Ethan knew nothing of Lily's future betrayal. He stated that the name Private Mansion sounded too gloomy, like the home of a dead person, so it had to be changed. Lily then asked her ex-husband if he had been the one who had persuaded the president to choose this name. The next moment, she approached the young man, took his hand, and thanked him for his help. Ethan then explained the situation by saying that the president simply liked the word Lily because it sounded nice. However, the girl decided that the head of the company agreed solely because of the requests of Ethan, who still loved her. Having asked his ex-wife to stop empty talk, the hero demanded that she sign the project documents. The girl thought about her grandmother, who would surely be overjoyed if she managed to secure this contract. After this, Lily put her signature and seal. When the main character was about to take a copy of the contract for the archive, the girl unexpectedly stopped him. Overwhelmed with gratitude for his help, she offered to thank him with lunch and reminded him of a cafe outside the city that he really liked. However, Ethan didn't have time for lunch, and he also noticed that Lily couldn't even remember the name of the place. even though they had been there many times. In response, the girl became indignant and reminded him that she had gone there many times precisely for his sake, and that already said a lot. She then added that if her ex-husband didn't want to go to that place, she could go there with Joshua and order steaks. However, the girl suddenly fell silent when she saw Scarlett enter the CEO's office. Lily chose to remain silent, while Scarlett herself greeted her politely. After this, Lily wanted to leave this office as quickly as possible and go outside. As Scarlett watched Lily leave, she thought that she was a stupid woman who decided to trade President Ye for the idiot Joshua. Then the girl looked at her boss, and from his reaction she realized that he was still not indifferent to his ex-wife. Realizing how difficult it was to win President Ye's heart, Scarlett proposed to terminate the contract and cancel the deal with the Wang family. However, Ethan, who continued to stare thoughtfully at one point, was not going to back down from his own words. Overhearing part of the conversation, Scarlett began to talk about her love of food and suggested going to Chicken Noodle Cafe. Then Ethan, as if reluctantly, agreed to go there with his subordinate, which made the girl very happy. An hour and a half later, the couple approached the cafe. As a warning, the hero noted that this was not a five-star restaurant. However, Scarlett objected and admitted that she even loved cheap tofu and was not a spoiled princess at all. Ethan remembered that she had achieved a high position on her own, and it was obvious that she had gone through many difficulties. Suddenly, Scarlett grabbed President Ye's hand. She hastened to apologize, explaining her behavior by the fear of tripping in her heels on the uneven threshold. However, Ethan assured her that everything was fine and asked her to hold on to him tighter. At that moment, he remembered how for 3 years he had dreamed of entering a cafe holding hands with Lily, but his wife had always refused him. Then he thought about her current lover and came to the conclusion that it was a completely different man who was now holding her hand. Noticing how her companion suddenly turned pale, Scarlett became worried about her president. Then Ethan asked the girl not to worry and said that outside the office she could call him simply by his first name. Scarlett wanted to know what thoughts had caused him such sadness, but the hero replied that he hadn't thought about anything in particular. However, he was willing to bet that Lily and her lover were now cooing like doves and eating steaks in some cafe. While Scarlett tried to understand his mood, Ethan thought about Charles and even considered ordering him to break Joshua's third leg. Meanwhile, at the QY health food restaurant in the XR shopping mall, Sydney asked Lily why she invited her to lunch today. Then Lily, with a satisfied smile, handed her friend the blue folder and offered to look through its contents. Sydney was impressed not only by the fact that the girl managed to sign the contract, but also by the fact that the project itself was named after her. Sydney thought that her friend might have had to get closer to President Ye, but Lily denied everything. Smiling, Sydney reminded her friend of her desire to rent a room with Joshua as an investment for her own family. Then Lily took the contract back and called her friend a fool, after which she remembered Joshua's promise to solve the Wang family's financial problems. With the project in hand, Lily actually wanted to show off the result to earn Grandma Wang's approval and respect. Remembering Ethan, the girl reflected on the fact that it was he who came up with this excellent project, and she wanted to help him bring it to life. Lily believed that she had sacrificed herself for her family and future with her husband, but now he made her feel guilty. After asking her friend not to be angry, Sydney stated that she considered Lily the purest and most innocent girl in the world. When she asked why the project was named after her, the girl replied that the reason was Ethan, who allegedly begged the director for it. Sydney was surprised at how much the protagonist humiliated himself in front of the president in order to have the project named after his ex-wife. In her opinion, this could only be explained by love, after which she suggested acting according to the previously outlined plan. She advised the girl to marry Joshua and bring the Wang clan into the city's high society, and then take on Mateo and Riley. According to her calculations, after her grandmother's death, Lily would have been able to receive half of the family's fortune, or at least 500 million. If Joshua started to irritate her, the girl could always divorce him. She wouldn't even be 30 yet, and she would already be a billionaire. While Sydney was telling all this, she asked Lily not to forget about her friend. Raising their cups in a toast, Lily asked her friend to keep this secret for her sake. At 7 o'clock in the evening, there was another family meeting at the Shishan Villa. Riley was outraged that Lily's whole family was together again. Then Lily loudly placed the contract on the table and solemnly announced the signing of the contract with the corporation. Jumping up from their seats, The astonished father and daughter simultaneously screamed, not believing what they were hearing. Then an angry Riley grabbed the document and began to study it carefully. Seeing the title First Class Lily, the girl decided that her sister had forged the title of the contract. She was amazed by her self-confidence. Lily asked if Vincent could confirm the information about the contract with Scarlett, since he was on good terms with her. Grabbing his smartphone, he immediately contacted Scarlett. He was surprised that the contract was actually signed and even renamed. After finishing his conversation with the vice president, the man looked up and informed his shocked daughter that the document was genuine. Old Lady Wang began to praise her granddaughter for her excellent work. She could not have imagined that she had managed to secure the contract. Not knowing exactly what her sister had done to President Ye, Riley desperately wanted to understand why the project was named after Lily. She did not believe that the president could sign the contract for her sake, reminded him of her divorce, and stated that this man belonged to her. The girl also threatened her sister not to come between her and President Ye, after which she headed for the exit. Meanwhile, Lily convinced her grandmother that she had not tried to seduce anyone and had achieved the signing of the contract honestly. Then Grandma Van appointed Vincent as the project manager. Lily and her father became his deputies and had to work hard, but Lily didn't understand why she wasn't made the lead, since the project was named after her and she was the one who signed the contract. However, Vincent nudged the girl with his elbow and accused her of insolence. She was the youngest in the family, but was already trying to jump above her head. Then Old Lady Wang asked her granddaughter to temporarily work under the guidance of her father and uncle, due to her lack of experience. She also promised that if the girl showed good results, she would receive more powers. After thanking her grandmother, the girl promised to work for the benefit of the Wang family and decided not to allow anyone to take credit for her achievements. Meanwhile, Riley was already at home. She called Lily a divorcee who dared to shamelessly seek the attention of President Yi. The girl put a lot of effort into her appearance and worked on herself like a madwoman, while Lily tried to ruin everything. Riley was completely reluctant to let her sister have any contact with the president. And suddenly, the right idea occurred to her. Deciding that the best solution would be to marry Lily off as soon as possible, the girl picked up her smartphone and was about to make a call. If Lily got married again, she wouldn't be able to flirt with President Ye anymore. So Riley asked her brother for Joshua's phone number. Meanwhile, the young man himself was in a nightclub. Hearing the girl's voice, Joshua was surprised, not understanding why this stunning girl decided to call him. Quietly calling the guy a dog, Riley expressed hope for a good conversation and asked if he had some free time. Since Joshua was not busy, the girl told him that Lily had signed a contract with Huashen and that the project was named after her. Joshua, amazed by what he heard, knew the president of the Huashen Corporation as a man whose influence in Yunzhou was unrivaled. So Riley advised him to act quickly before it was too late, and suggested that he propose to her sister right away. Madly infatuated with Lily, Joshua knew she had just recently been divorced, so he was wary of talking about marriage so quickly. However, Riley reminded him that her sister was considered the first beauty of the city, and she could be taken away very quickly. Moreover, Joshua almost managed to drag the girl into bed at the hotel. But Ethan, who suddenly appeared, ruined everything. Not wanting to miss such a chance and realizing that some members of the Wang family were willing to help him, Joshua decided to take advantage of the situation. Meanwhile, a gray car pulled up next to Scarlett's red car as it was pulling out of the parking lot. After the girl left the car dealership, the vice president of the Huashen Corporation asked why Joshua was looking for her. Because she didn't answer his calls, the guy had to come in person and talk to her. Since Ethan worked under her supervision, the girl asked if his case was connected with her because of this. In response, Joshua, looking greedily at the woman, reminded her that he had promised back at the anniversary not to allow Ethan to find a place for himself in Yunzhou. Joshua offered to pay him 10 years' salary if Scarlett fired him from the company. In exchange, he promised to do the girl any favor. Scarlett couldn't believe her ears when she heard the proposal to fire Ethan and pay him 10 years' salary. Joshua was sure that the guard received about $200,000 a year, which meant that 10 times the amount was approximately $2 million. Lacking the authority to decide such matters on her own, Scarlett decided to call Ethan first and ask his opinion. Hearing the incoming call, the hero answered the call. The girl told him about Joshua's offer to quit Huashen, noting with irony that the offer seemed very tempting. The guy, without even thinking, agreed to receive 10 times his salary and stated that he was ready to quit immediately after the money was transferred to the account. After finishing the conversation, Scarlett informed Joshua that Ethan had agreed to leave. As Joshua had expected, this poor slob was willing to change jobs for money, after which the guy asked for his bank account number. Having received the necessary information, he promised to transfer the funds immediately and inquired about the size of Ethan's annual salary. However, when Scarlett named the figure of $6.7 million a year, Joshua didn't even hear the numbers at first and mechanically entered them into the phone. Realizing the size of the sum, he shouted indignantly and declared that even the company's CEO did not earn that much money. Thinking that Scarlett was simply making fun of him, Joshua declared that he only wanted to buy Ethan out. But the girl remained completely serious. She demanded that the guy moderate his arrogance. If he didn't have that kind of money, it didn't mean that there weren't people richer than him. Joshua noted that he would not mind protecting Scarlett and her beloved Ethan if the girl did not later regret her choice. He then spoke about his intention to propose to Lily and assured her that he would definitely invite the vice president and her dog to the wedding. As he was leaving, the boy laughed loudly and asked Scarlett to discipline Ethan properly so that he wouldn't howl during the wedding ceremony. Scarlett was sure that everything his family had built over decades would sooner or later collapse because of him. Secretly, she hoped that Joshua and Lily would get married as soon as possible so that Ethan would finally forget her. And then she would have a chance herself. Meanwhile, in his office at the Huashen Corporation headquarters, the hero was receiving another visitor. Restaurant owner Yunjo Andres couldn't understand why he had been called. Ethan said that he was going to buy out all of the entrepreneur's restaurants. He guaranteed that he would destroy Gray's business within 2 months. Delighted with President Yi's desire to purchase his establishments, Andres asked 60 for the 7 restaurants and promised his full support. Having agreed to the deal, Ethan remembered how, at the old lady's anniversary, that same Gray had threatened to cut off his oxygen supply in the restaurant business. Now the protagonist has signed the documents and decided to pay the enemy back in kind. A few days later, people walking along Penglai Shopping Street were surprised to notice a familiar restaurant that had changed its name. Now the establishment was called Zaoblachny, and this name sounded quite respectable. Many decided that the restaurant still belonged to Gray. At the same time, the man slammed his fist on the table, indignant that the restaurant across the street had changed its name. He took this as a direct challenge to his establishment, the Extraterrestrial. His assistant said that Mr. Andres had sold his restaurants 2 days ago, and the new owners could have come up with such a name. Reflecting on the upstart who dared to compete with him, Gray said he intended to leave his opponent literally without pants. He then ordered the servant to keep a close eye on the restaurant opposite, after which he switched to more important matters. Gathering his staff, Gray announced that today was extremely important because of the upcoming marriage proposal. Meanwhile, at the luxury Tiffany jewelry boutique, a salesperson handed young Mr. Joshua a custom-made ring. Joshua was already thinking about how to win Lily over with one decisive step, by making her a luxurious marriage proposal. Meanwhile, Lily suggested the guy get something to eat somewhere, since she had some work to do as the deputy project manager. However, Joshua said that he had already booked a table at the Zaoblachny restaurant, which was located very close to her office. Stopping in front of the golden sign, the boy and girl looked at the new establishment with interest. Lily thought the restaurant was very luxurious, but Joshua couldn't figure out when exactly this place had opened across from the Outer World restaurant. Having appreciated the impressive decor of the establishment, which he was sure belonged to Gray, the guy agreed to have dinner with her there. At this time, the hero watched from the balcony of the building what was happening below. People around him were trying to understand in surprise what exactly the man was planning. Numerous spectators witnessed a lavish marriage proposal, on which more than 100,000 were spent. Passers-by, amazed by the spectacle, watched the events unfold and paid almost no attention to the incredible beauty of the main character of the events. One of the eyewitnesses admitted that he would be ready to give 10 years of his life for one night with Lily. Ethan was furious that Joshua took his place at his own restaurant. He was disturbing the visitors and was also about to propose to the woman he once loved. He then asked Janet to tell the manager to remove all this trash, including the microphones, from the second floor. Meanwhile, Joshua was already down on one knee, holding a ring box in his hand and trying to propose to Lily. However, he suddenly fell silent because he saw something strange. Men in white uniforms interrupted the solemn ceremony, horrifying the future groom. Using needles, the staff began popping the balloons. Outraged by what was happening, Joshua demanded to know why the balloons were being destroyed and also ordered that the roses not be removed. Restaurant patrons laughed as the waiters ruined Joshua's romantic plans before they even came to fruition. Only now did Lily realize that he was going to propose to her. But she herself felt rather relieved. Joshua immediately demanded to see the restaurant owner, declaring that such an important guest should have been recognized immediately. At that moment, Ethan was calmly descending the stairs. The protagonist inquired about the reason for such noise and noted that if the guest was not going to eat, then it would be better for him not to disturb the others. Seeing Ethan, Joshua shouted even louder and demanded that he not interfere in other people's affairs. When the guy expressed a desire to talk to the restaurant owner, Ethan calmly stated that he was the owner of the establishment. Joshua froze with his mouth open in surprise. Lily also couldn't believe what she heard. Joshua stated that he already knew about the sale of the restaurant by Andres. All of this owner's restaurants in the city were bought by one person. In response, the hero promised to increase the salary of one of the employees tenfold if she hit the bully with a mop. Upon hearing about such an increase, the woman immediately carried out the order and hit the noisy guest. She ignored his threats and chose to follow the orders of her boss, who paid her salary. Before this, Joshua didn't understand who exactly ruined his romantic evening. But now he accused Ethan of jealousy. In response, Ethan indifferently reminded him that he had divorced Lily a long time ago, so such ridicule did not bother him at all. However, the restaurant was run by the owner's rules only, and Joshua couldn't even lift a finger without the owner's permission. Joshua himself did not believe that Ethan was capable of buying the restaurant, and he also doubted Scarlett's words about her participation in this project. Then the girl only confirmed that she owned a share of the business. Earning money together with the boss was a completely normal thing. Joshua stated that Ethan could have invested a maximum of $200,000 in the restaurant, which was a measly 1% of the establishment's value. He then showed off his own gift, a ring that weighed 3 carats and cost over $4 million. In his opinion, even in his entire career as a bodyguard, Ethan would never have been able to buy such a piece of jewelry for Lily. After this, the young man again dropped to one knee in front of Lily and persistently continued to propose to her. Scarlett, who was watching what was happening, understood that Joshua was now openly humiliating her boss. At the same time, the girl understood that if Lily agreed to marry him, then she herself would have a chance to become closer to Ethan. The hero himself carefully watched his ex-wife and waited for her response to Joshua's proposal. However, everything turned out completely differently than she imagined. Seeing that Ethan was nearby, Lily asked her fiancé to give her a little time. For Joshua, Yunjo's first girlfriend was special, so he thought it was only natural that she didn't agree right away. The guy said that he was ready to wait as long as it took, but still offered her an expensive ring. Then Lily said that Ethan constantly called himself a big man and the owner of restaurants, but during all this time, he never gave her a ring. But then the girl asked her ex-husband to forget her previous words and reminded herself that Ethan was just a poor hanger-on. However, Ethan replied that if his wife had not betrayed him, he would have given her a ring not with a 3-carat diamond, but with a 21-carat diamond. Recalling how they had gone to see a film with the same name a year earlier, Lily was outraged by the lack of romance in the ring gift. However, a year later, her husband promised to give her a 21-carat diamond ring. Standing with her back to her ex-husband, the upset girl called him a liar. A little later, Ethan informed Scarlett that Lily's fiancé would probably receive a positive answer from her, although she had not yet agreed, but had not refused either. Then the girl asked if the boss would like Lily and Joshua to get married, and he came to them and introduced himself as President Hua Shen. Putting his cup down on the saucer, the young man agreed with only half of what was said. The hero did not intend to wait for this moment until the wedding. On the contrary, he was preparing to do it on the very day of their wedding. On the very day Lily decided she was marrying a billionaire, Ethan was going to show her who the real billionaire was. When a girl thinks she's hit the jackpot and entered high society, then she'll understand what kind of man she's lost. For Scarlett, this meant that the hero had finally put an end to his relationship with his ex-wife. At that moment, the employee reported the results of the investigation. The guest singer's microphone was replaced right before he went on stage. Impressed by Ethan's observation, Scarlett noted that without his intervention, the performance could have ended in disaster. After the culprit was identified from surveillance cameras, The officers brought him here. Ethan, sitting at the table, wanted to know the name of the man who hired him, suspecting Gray. However, he immediately began to deny knowing Gray, and then the hero finally became convinced that he was behind what happened. When Ethan demanded to give him the phone, the man began to refuse, becoming indignant and insulting him. The protagonist was about to take harsh measures, but Scarlett stopped him. Taking a step forward, the girl decided to expose the criminal herself, which greatly surprised Ethan. The bully looked frail but was still a man, so the hero doubted that Scarlett would be able to cope with him. Meanwhile, the detainee looked at the girl and compared her figure with the woman of easy virtue whom he had hired the day before for 688 yuan. Suddenly, Scarlett grabbed it, confident that the phone contained the contacts of the person who had paid for the disruption of the event. Experiencing severe pain, the man quickly unlocked the device and asked the girl to let him go. Scarlett then snatched the smartphone and threw it to Ethan, who caught it instantly. Raising his head, the corporation president suddenly shouted, warning the girl of danger. The attacker rushed at her. However, Scarlett showed incredible reflexes, grabbing her opponent by the shoulders and throwing him to the floor with a crash. Holding the bandit, who was screaming in pain, the girl asked the president for forgiveness for distracting him from his tea party. As Secretary Janet hugged the vice president, she admired her actions and thought that she herself would be happy to become her bodyguard. Meanwhile, the criminal did not calm down. Lying on the floor, he began to make obscene hints towards Scarlett and offered to spend the night with him. Placing her foot on his chest, Scarlett was ready to punish the impudent man herself, but decided that he was unworthy of such an honor. As if not noticing her boss, who was impressed, the girl said that only strong men could appreciate her strength. Finding her gaze too revealing, Ethan reported that he had found correspondence with Gray on her phone. He was going to call the restaurant magnate right in front of Scarlett. Recalling the boss's 3-year marriage to his ex-wife, the girl thought that he had always been attracted to overly immature women like Lily. According to Scarlett, the hero had never been with a truly mature woman, and therefore did not understand the full appeal of maturity. When Gray answered the call, he thought he was talking to his subordinate, whom he had not seen for a long time. Hearing an unfamiliar voice, the restaurant owner tried to find out who was calling from his man's phone and for what reason. Chuckling at the businessman's short memory, Ethan reminded him of his recent promise to cut off his oxygen supply. Finally realizing who was on the other end of the line, Gray recognized the Wang family's worthless son-in-law and wanted to find out what he was up to. Since it was Gray who sent people to disrupt the event at Ethan's restaurant, the hero believed that he should be the one asking questions. Realizing that the guy had actually acquired the Zhaoblachny restaurant, Gray became furious. Considering his actions to be a pathetic act of revenge, Gray stated that where he got the money from, Ethan would not be able to compete with him due to his lack of experience. However, the hero stated that he was ready to see the result, suggesting that he not be offended if the answer to the dirty play turned out to be just as dirty. 20 minutes later, people began to gather near the Venezimnaya restaurant. Brother Arbuz and his fighters approached Charles and reported that the group was fully prepared. Looking back at his subordinates, Liu relayed the young master's order to cause some trouble at the Outer World establishment. Upon learning of the guests' arrival, Gray ordered the chefs to give their all and ensure the highest level of service. However, soon the frightened waiter informed the restaurant owner that all the guests suddenly began to fall to the floor, foaming at the mouth. Having burst into the hall, the businessman stopped in front of the guests lying on the floor without signs of life and demanded that an ambulance be called immediately. Meanwhile, outside, Scarlett looked at the extraterrestrial and could not understand what was happening there. People who witnessed this spread rumors about the mass poisoning of several hundred foreigners from Southeast Asia. Gray, grief-stricken, was preparing to close the establishment, because even one death in the restaurant would deal an irreparable blow to its reputation. After this, Ethan opened several karaoke clubs and other establishments, and the people who threatened him at the Wang family anniversary began to go bankrupt. Half a month later, all the members of the Wang clan gathered for a family dinner at Shishan Villa. Samantha told about the escape of the owner of the karaoke bar Golden Mine, and that Gray sold the extraterrestrial for a pittance. Remembering how he had begged for money, Vincent relayed his words about Ethan's revenge and how he had suffered while trying to stand up for the Vans. Riley called his sister a star, to whom Joshua had already proposed 9 times in a row, and everyone was wondering when she would finally accept. Grandmother considered the Fan family an excellent match. Joshua was in love with Lily, but the groom's father complained about the bride's constant refusals. Then Lily decided that at the God of Song's concert tomorrow, the girl would agree to the wedding. Her grandmother, along with the rest of the relatives, raised their glasses in anticipation of the celebration and congratulated the girl in advance. Suddenly, Riley noticed with concern that her brother was not among those present. Mateo, meanwhile, was talking to Ethan. He informed him that at Lily's family dinner, they had decided to accept Joshua's proposal at the concert and suggested that they ruin the celebration. Feeling that Ethan had connections with influential people, the boy felt that he had to protect Lily from making a mistake. However, Ethan ordered not to interfere. But Mateo did not understand this because both he and Joshua constantly crossed the hero's path. But Ethan asked Mateo not to worry and promised to make Joshua's fate much more pitiful than that of his ex-wife's brother. Then Mateo said that in recent days, Lily had been spending her nights alone at home, and during the day she would go for walks or visit company. He noted that Ethan was acting like a block of ice, but he understood that he hoped that there was no connection between Lily and Lily. Not expecting such deep thoughts from Mateo, the hero praised the guy for his success and was ready to listen to the rest. The guy's new proposal was that Ethan marry his younger sister, who would be the ideal wife and could bear him a son. After such an initiative, the hero no longer wanted to talk to Mateo and simply hung up. Looking at the smartphone screen, the young man studied the contents of the messages sent by his former relative. In the first notification, Mateo sent the guy explicit selfies of his sister, stolen directly from her phone. Mateo agreed that Lily was beautiful, and particularly noted Riley's captivating figure, which was impossible to take your eyes off. After studying such messages, the protagonist experienced mixed feelings. As he fell asleep, the boy remembered Lily, who was finally going to marry Joshua, and now had the opportunity to be with him. During the evening concert, the God of Song announced the next composition. The singer said that it was commissioned by one of his fans for the girl he was madly in love with. Wanting to dedicate a song to his beloved Lily, Joshua decided to take advantage of the moment to ask her an important question. To deafening cheers from the crowd, Joshua dropped to one knee and proposed to Lily. People around loudly demanded that she say yes. Everyone was touched by the fact that the proposal was made right at the concert. Lily, who found herself the center of attention in a stadium filled with thousands, accepted the box containing the ring and gave Joshua her consent. For Scarlett, the connection between Ethan and Lily was finally broken. As she left the stadium after the concert, she thought about Ethan and dreamed that this amazing man belonged to her. Now we move on to the Rose Villa. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the hero opened the door of his house and was surprised to see Scarlett standing there in the pouring rain. After apologizing to President Ye, the girl told about her trip to the God of Song's concert and how she got stuck in traffic on the way back. Ethan then offered his guest a towel to dry her wet hair, for which she thanked him. As if by chance, Scarlett told President Ye about Joshua's proposal to Lily at the concert and that the girl had accepted. Ethan, not expecting this, silently looked away, thinking about the words of his deputy. Having declared his revenge on the Fang family open, the hero knew that as a first-class family in Yunzhou, they would need time to prepare for the wedding. However, even before the lovers exchanged vows, the guy intended to send the Fan clan to the bottom. The girls said that the head of the clan was Henry, and the basis of his empire was the Yijia chain of budget hotels. The Joshua family owned more than 20 hotels in Yunzhou and beyond, but the brand value was no more than 3 billion. The Fan family was trying to fill a niche between budget and premium hotels, and if it weren't for Paul Dubreuil, they wouldn't have even been able to break even. Scarlett didn't understand how her boss knew hotel guru Paul Dubreuil, but Ethan had already called his uncle. The man, who called Ethan Chris, relayed his grandfather's words that the boy had overcome the challenge and was now ready to turn the business around. When Ethan told him about the Yijia hotel chain, he immediately remembered it. Its owner was going through hard times, and the guy asked his uncle for help. At first, Uncle thought that Ethan wanted to pull the Fan family out of the hole, but the young man, on the contrary, wanted to bring them to complete collapse. If the future head of the Ye clan needed his uncle's help, he wasn't going to refuse. Poor Joshua had simply crossed the wrong person. For Scarlett, President Yi was a truly frightening figure. One call from him could send the entire empire into oblivion. Then Scarlett mentioned that Lily and Mateo's wedding was supposed to take place in a month. However, Ethan, already knowing about this, stated that he had already given orders to deal with this issue. These words surprised the girl. Apparently, it was impossible to hide anything from her boss. Late in the evening, we find ourselves in one of the city's gyms. There, Charles inquired about the health of the soldiers recovering from their wounds. The boss's new orders were for the boys to bring women or book their own rooms at the hotels Liu had sent the group. He then posted videos of women online, intending to hit the hotel business where it hurt the most. After praising President Ye for his foresight, Scarlett took the papers and continued to deal with work matters. Joshua didn't work for his father's company. He just received several $100 million. He had an older brother, but he was just expecting an inheritance. However, there was one person Ethan should be wary of. That person was Joshua's mother and Henry's legal wife, Jessica. This woman came from the influential Liu clan, whose representatives lived in the city of Tianhai. Many bowed their heads before this woman, and her connections were so serious that extreme caution was required. Looking at photographs of Joshua's mother, the protagonist would never have thought that this scoundrel had such a beautiful mother. Scarlett said he took after his father, and members of high society considered Henry unworthy of Jessica, whose family was much wealthier. After asking the girl to disregard the Liu family, Ethan said that he considered them too insignificant to be afraid of. A week later, Joshua was driving in his car, screaming at the news of Qi Chang's bankruptcy. The once stable company sank to the bottom, and all the companies he invested in collapsed one after another. After telling his father about the liquidation of all the enterprises in which he had invested, the boy asked him for another $100 million. However, Henry himself needed money, and the hotel business guru Dubreuil advised him to reopen hotels and develop them. Joshua reminded his father that Dubreuil himself had previously opposed such a measure. But Henry pointed out that times had changed. According to Joshua's calculations, this would require an investment of up to $2 billion, and in case of failure, Joshua's family would go bankrupt. The irritated father did not want to listen to his son's instructions, promised to give him $500 million, but no longer wanted to hear his moralizing. Joshua thanked his father with a smile, promising to turn $500 million into $5 billion. When Lily inquired about the reason for such wild joy, her fiancé said that her father was going to give him another $500 million. The guy then asked about what it was like to be the future Mrs. Fan, promising to soon turn $500 million into $5 billion. He was sure that her ex-husband's father couldn't find even $50,000. Joshua then suggested that they change the way they addressed each other after the wedding. Hearing the word husband, the girl thought about the fact that for the past 3 years, she had only called Ethan that. They had once been a good couple. If only Ethan hadn't been a poor parasite, they would have been fine. Lily didn't want to call anyone else her husband. The girl then asked her fiancé to take her to Huashen Corporation to personally deliver the invitations to President Ye and Scarlett. Having immediately agreed, Joshua asked whether it was worth inviting Ethan. But the girl did not want to see her ex-husband at the wedding. But this was precisely the main pleasure for Joshua. So he asked the bride for an additional invitation for Ethan. By inviting his rival to watch a truly lavish wedding, the guy wanted to see him shed crocodile tears. Joshua was feeling overwhelmed by his problems, so he invited Lily to stay with him overnight to help relieve the tension. Referring to Grandma Wang's words about the inadmissibility of living together before marriage, the girl asked him to be patient a little. Dissatisfied with the conservatism of the bride's grandmother, Joshua was upset by Lily's cunning, which did not even allow him to touch her. As they drove to the Huashen Corporation office, the girl silently asked Ethan not to blame her for her choice. In fact, she still loved her ex-husband. She simply felt that Ethan was too distant from Joshua's family, and they met at the wrong time. When Lily arrived at the office, Scarlett noted that her status as the future wife of a billionaire gave her a special nobility and elegance. Having thanked her for the compliment, Lily was about to pass on the invitation to Scarlett and President E, but she was asked about the date of the celebration. When the girl handed over the invitation, she indicated that the wedding was scheduled for May 12th. That is, exactly 1 week later. Looking at the card, Scarlett remembered that May 12th was Ethan's birthday. Lily was surprised how the vice president knew such information, and Scarlett explained that the date coincided with her father's birthday. Scarlett felt it was cruel for the future Mrs. Fan to marry on her ex-husband's birthday. However, Joshua refused to change the wedding date, promising to make sure his rival would remember this day as a day of shame. Hoping to find President Ye in his office, Lily wanted to personally convey the invitation to him. But Scarlett suggested that her guest go into the office herself, since she was already going to become Joshua's wife, which meant she could find out who the real head of the company was. Knocking on the door of President Ye's office, the girl heard permission to enter. Seeing General Director Hua Shen from behind, she froze. The girl couldn't understand why this silhouette seemed so familiar to her. However, recognizing the man sitting in front of her as Ethan, Lily asked where President Ye was, as she wanted to deliver the invitation. When the guy turned around and asked the purpose of her visit, the girl asked him to convey the invitation to the president when he returned. The invitation stated that the wedding would take place on May 12th at one of the city hotels. Lily then confessed to her ex-husband that the wedding date coincided with his birthday. Noticing the guy's frightening look, the girl asked him not to look at her like that, explaining that she had not chosen the date. Smiling, Ethan asked if his ex-wife had been afraid of causing trouble by getting married on his birthday. Lily was about to hand over a separate invitation to him personally. The hero read a message in which the author invited Ethan to the wedding, if he considered himself a man, in order to see the celebration with his own eyes. The guy immediately recognized Joshua's handwriting, and then invited the girl to leave, congratulating her on the fulfillment of her dream. After this, unable to contain her feelings, Lily began to ask her ex-husband not to come to the wedding. The girl knew how much Ethan still loved her, so she was afraid that at the party he could get drunk and start a fight, disgracing himself. But Ethan asked not to be considered the person who was going to ruin the wedding. For Lily, that would be too great an honor. As she watched Ethan leave, she noticed something eerie in his smile that sent shivers down her spine. After finishing handing out invitations, Lily left the Huashen Corporation office. Scarlett believes Joshua asked for trouble by deliberately scheduling the wedding for Ethan's birthday. Ethan called Joshua a fool for trying to upstage his celebration, then instructed Scarlett to send out the date of his celebration to all his business partners. Having accepted the boss's assignment, the girl decided to arrange a grand banquet for Ethan so that he would finally learn about her true feelings. Soon, the wedding day arrived, and by 6 o'clock in the morning, Joshua was screaming in rage over yet another failure. Although he invested in a reliable project, it was blocked for violations. Over the past week, more than 10 of Joshua's profitable companies have gone bankrupt, one after another. Futures, commodities, and even an underground casino. All investments went to waste. Thus, Joshua lost almost all $500 million. According to his brother Mike, someone was deliberately sinking him. It was impossible to have a 100% failure with blind investing. Lost in thought, the guy couldn't remember a single serious conflict, except perhaps Ethan, whose wife he stole. However, his brother believed that this trash was not capable of such a thing. His wife was considered the first beauty of Yunzhou. She had many admirers. Thinking with disappointment about his fiancée, who had so far only brought him losses, the guy realized that he had already lost $500 million. Trying to calm his brother, Mike said that in the worst-case scenario, Joshua could return to the family company and live off his father. The main thing was that Lily was next to him. That old man could be the king of business, but on the love front, Joshua defeated him. Having agreed with this, the guy decided to call the bride. Lily told him that she tried on a wedding dress and put on makeup. Then Joshua laughed loudly and asked his future wife to get a good night's sleep, as she had a lot of work to do that night. Sydney, who witnessed this phone conversation, wanted to find out from her friend what exactly Joshua had talked to her about. The girl admitted that she would never have married him if it weren't for his money. But Ethan always spoke to his wife kindly. Sydney found it strange that her friend was marrying another man, but continued to praise her ex-husband. After today's wedding, Lily was afraid of losing Ethan forever. She was afraid that if she got divorced in a couple of years, Ethan would no longer be alone. Taking her friend's hand, Sydney dared to ask her to look at herself in the mirror. With such a beautiful appearance as Lily's, according to her friend, no man could refuse her. Sydney then stated that Ethan was already on her hook, meaning he would remain her backup option for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, in the upscale Jiangnanli district, Jessica was preparing for her son's wedding. She told Henry about the risks of their plan, which had already consumed the family's entire fortune, and noted that it was still not worth trusting Paul Dubreuil. But Henry said that if he hadn't trusted Paul Dubreuil in the past, the company would never have been able to go public. At the same time, he did not take a penny from his wife. He did not need handouts from his wife, whose family always looked down on him. Putting her hand on her husband's shoulder, Jessica asked him to temporarily forget about business, because today was their son's wedding. Knowing about Joshua's desire to humiliate Lily's ex-husband right at the ceremony, the woman asked her husband to reason with his son. However, this did not seem like a serious problem to Henry, and he advised focusing on more important things. The man already knew that President Ye was going to attend the wedding, so he asked his wife to give him a warm welcome. Meanwhile, Scarlett and Ethan, who lived in the Rose Garden Villa area, were getting ready to go to the wedding. Scarlett walked up to the car and said that it was time for them to leave. According to the hero's plan, today all of Yunzhou should have learned that the president of the Huashen Corporation was the very son-in-law of the Wang family. Scarlett admitted that she would give anything to see Lily's face distorted with horror. An hour later, they arrived at the Ritz-Carlton Portman Hotel, where Henry had already met Mateo and was delighted with his presence at his son's wedding. Lily was amazed by the connections of the Fan family. The cream of Yunzhou's business and politics gathered there, and she was happy to join such a wealthy family. And then suddenly, Lily and Sydney, looking around, saw another guest. They were shocked by the appearance of President Ma himself. Ma was one of the 20 richest people in the world, so no one understood why he decided to attend the wedding of the Fang family's son. Struck by the visit of the richest man in the country, Henry could not even dream that such a respected gentleman would accept the invitation. However, President Ma admitted that he came to congratulate the newlyweds and meet with the head of the Huasheng Corporation, Mr. Ye. Impressed by President Ye's connections, Henry asked the guests to sit at their tables and promised to find out where Chief Huashen was. After thanking the man, President Ma sat down at the table, and Lily realized that all these people had come to their wedding just to meet Mr. Ye. The girl involuntarily wondered what status and what beauty one had to have to become the wife of such a man as President Yi. Then she looked at Joshua standing next to her and realized that this was something her fiancé could only dream of. Hearing on the phone about the arrival of an important guest, Henry promised to personally meet him at the entrance. The father then turned to his son and announced that President Yi and Vice President Scarlett had arrived, after which he called him to greet the guests. Those gathered discussed President Ye, who, in the space of a month, bought up restaurants and clubs, ruined companies, and sent dozens of firms to the bottom. Hearing about the arrival of such an important person that even Mr. Ma wanted to meet, Riley and her grandmother also wanted to see President Yi. Soon, a luxurious white car pulled up to the hotel doors, delivering guests from the Huashen Corporation to the wedding. The young man in the suit bowed respectfully to Scarlett as she stepped outside. However, the astonished guests could not believe that the man who appeared after her was that very President Yi. Approaching Mr. Fan, the girl introduced him to President Ye, the head of the Huashen Corporation. At this moment, the main guest of the holiday finally got out of the car. Standing before him was none other than Ethan. Scarlett immediately introduced him as the president of Huashen Corporation. Forgetting about the bouquet of roses in her hands, the stunned Lily could not take her eyes off her ex-husband, who turned out to be President Yi. Sydney was equally shocked, not understanding why this influential person turned out to be Ethan. Henry said President Ye's visit was a great honor for him and his son. Jessica, seeing the guest, didn't even imagine that President Ye would be such a young and handsome man. Upon seeing Mr. Joshua's wife, the head of the Huashen Corporation called her a beauty, for which the groom's father thanked him. For Jessica, the young man seemed too courteous, and her cheeks even blushed from the praise of such a handsome man. Unable to contain himself, Joshua screamed and declared that Ethan was pretending to be the president because he was just Scarlett's bodyguard. However, he suddenly fell silent when he saw President Ma approaching, for whom meeting Mr. Ye was a great honor. Shaking hands with Ethan, President Ma admitted that he was not familiar with Joshua's family and had come to Yunzhou solely to meet him. He also called Grandpa Ethan his idol, whom he had long wanted to visit, but was afraid of disturbing the elderly man. This time, President Ma expressed his desire to exchange contacts with President Ye and admitted that he would be happy to see him again. The guests were amazed that the richest man in the country, who stood on top of the world, was the first to ask Ethan for his phone number. Looking back at Henry, President Ma was forced to say goodbye as he had another important meeting to attend. Suddenly, in front of everyone, one man collapsed to the floor and began begging Mr. Ye to spare him. The guests recognized him as Martin, the general representative of Tuan in Yunzhou. Seeing him crawling at Ethan's feet, Joshua was shocked, Martin begged President Ye to give him back his representative rights. He learned from his superiors that he had incurred the wrath of President Ye, but was promised that if Mr. Ye forgave him, his job would be returned. After admitting his mistake, Martin regretted that he had not seen the great man in the boy and had dared to insult him. All this happened because of the Wang family. Vincent tried to clarify with Martin whether he was really sure that Ethan was the president of E. Martin replied that President Simon himself told him about Ethan's merits, and if it weren't for Vincent, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Remembering that very phone call at the anniversary, the man now realized that it was true. At that moment, another person burst into the hall. Everyone recognized him as Gray's boss, the owner of the Vnezemnoy restaurant, whose business was practically destroyed by 7 competitors' establishments. Pointing to the Wang family for inciting him at the anniversary, Gray apologized to President Ye and begged him to consider him as if he did not exist. Even Joshua began to admit that Ethan was indeed the president of Huashen Corporation. Then Mateo suggested that everyone take out their smartphones and open the Celestial Eye to find out who really headed the corporation. Following his advice, Lily and her fiancé grabbed their phones and decided to check the identity of the head of a huge company. After checking, Joshua couldn't believe his own eyes. He thought it was some kind of ridiculous joke. Grandma Wang, pretending to lose consciousness, did not want to meet Ethan's eyes after such a sensational discovery. Jonathan wanted to take his mother to the hospital, but Vincent reminded his brother that today was his daughter's wedding and said that he would take his mother himself. After this, Vincent grabbed the old woman and hastily took her away from the party right in front of his brother and his wife, leaving them alone with Ethan's wrath. Left alone, Lily couldn't take her eyes off her ex-husband, thinking that he had appeared here only for her. At that moment, Riley appeared next to the guy, wanting to make sure that it was really Ethan, the president of the Huashen Corporation, in front of her. The girl said that she could not imagine that the man of her dreams was by her side all this time and secretly protected her for 3 years. Shielding Ethan with her body, Scarlett demanded that Riley stop pestering President E, reminded that he had once been her sister's husband. The hero did not understand at what point he became the man of Riley's dreams. Then she remembered her father's words about how her grandfather had originally wanted to marry her off to Ethan. Riley burst into tears and declared herself the woman Ethan loved most. And then he asked Scarlett to have security take her away. Henry noted that the situation was bad. Ethan was Lily's ex-husband and could only come to the wedding to ruin it. Jessica thought that if Ethan had come to take the bride, it would have been half the trouble. But he could have come for revenge on Joshua. Approaching President Ye, Jessica wanted to know if his visit was related to Lily. The woman was willing to let him take the girl. Lily herself perceived Ethan's appearance as an attempt to disrupt the wedding. As the head of the Huashen Corporation, he returned for his ex-wife. However, Ethan stated that although Lily was his ex-wife, there was no longer any connection between them. Meanwhile, Vincent, sitting in the car next to his mother, demanded that the driver go to the hospital as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the old woman let out an inhuman scream, which scared her son to death, who only now realized that she had not lost consciousness at all. Only now did the woman realize why Vincent's father had called Ethan a dragon among men, and why she had driven him out of the family with her own hands. At the same time, Jessica became furious at his disrespectful attitude towards the wedding guest of honor and hit her son. The woman demanded that he immediately apologize to President E. Joshua never thought that Ethan would end up as the president of the corporation. He wanted to humiliate his ex-husband, but instead, he embarrassed himself. Inviting the president inside, Henry promised that he would make his idiot son publicly apologize as soon as the gentleman sat down at the table. These words greatly infuriated Joshua, who was already at his limit because of his shame. Then, holding the glass in his hand, the father turned to Joshua and demanded that he quickly pour President Ye some wine as an apology. Joshua, who had invited so many acquaintances to the wedding, could not imagine how he would be able to look them in the eye if he served his enemy. Lost in thought, he couldn't understand what kind of family would voluntarily allow their son to pretend to be a poor parasite for 3 years. In his understanding, the real President E was in hiding, and Ethan simply became friends with Scarlett in order to use her to play the role of boss. He also suggested that Scarlett could have altered the data in the Celestial Eye app, or even hired hackers. Moreover, President Ma looked different from what he showed on TV. His height was also different, and Joshua came to the conclusion that he was also fake. Laughing quietly, Joshua approached his father, who did not understand the reasons for his son's strange behavior. Then the guy claimed that Ethan was just a bodyguard who put on a show with Scarlett to make Lily bite her elbows. An angry Jessica reminded her son of how President Ma treated the head of the Huasheng Corporation. However, Joshua, confident in his own rightness, drew the family's attention to the difference in the appearance and height of this President Ma. Some guests agreed with him, noting that the real Mr. Ma's chin wasn't even that sharp. Scarlett asked how it was possible to fake the data of the heavenly eye. But, according to the guys, she could very well do it for the sake of a beautiful performance. Martin then attacked Joshua with insults and said that if he wanted to die, he shouldn't have dragged them along with him. Joshua claimed that Ethan allegedly paid them, after which the guy ordered security to throw out both ill-wishers. However, Lily perceived everything that was happening as a trap set by her ex-husband. The girl begged Ethan to stop this performance, since today was not the day to play pranks. In response, Ethan calmly remarked that if the thought that he was not president could console them, then he was willing to agree with that. Samantha believed that Ethan was incapable of becoming such a powerful figure, and that this little brat had only scared her to death. When Lily's mother was about to declare that Ethan had staged a real circus, her husband hit her on the head and pulled her by the hair. Jonathan was struck by his wife's desire to play with fire, but the woman continued to suspect the young man of pretending. Then he promised to divorce her if she dared to yell at Ethan. Shocked by such betrayal, the woman froze with indignation. Henry then suggested that they sort everything out after the wedding and invited the guests to take their seats while they waited for the ceremony. Sitting down next to President E, Scarlett called everyone present idiots for questioning Ethan's status. According to Ethan himself, everyone believed in his true situation except Joshua, Samantha, and the Wang and Fang families. The girl just wanted to explain everything to the others once again. However, the protagonist reminded her that today was his birthday and asked her to say a few words. Scarlett blushed when Ethan put his finger to her lips, but she did as he asked. Taking a glass of wine, the vice president of the corporation congratulated Ethan on his birthday. However, at that moment, another important guest appeared on the threshold, and everyone turned their gaze to the stranger. Henry announced the arrival of the famous boss, Harold, president of the Judodo Company. Harold, whose fortune was estimated in the tens of billions, reminded Mr. Joshua of their only meeting in the capital. Calling Lily and Joshua, Henry asked them to thank the gentleman. His visit and gift were a great honor for the family. However, Harold immediately apologized and explained that the gift was not intended for the son of the host of the celebration. Henry did not understand who the gift was intended for, and the guest said that he only had an envelope with money for the groom. Joshua guessed that Harold was holding a cigar humidor, and Harold confirmed this, praising him for his excellent observation. Harold said that he asked his subordinates to buy a set of cigars, but due to poor English, he was unable to read the name correctly. Hearing the name Gurkha Royal Courtesan Cigar, Joshua remembered that the most expensive examples cost over 7 million. Harold clarified that the cost of the set was slightly less than 7 million, but very close to that amount. After this, he began to apologize to Mr. Fan and the young men, explaining that he had to leave soon on business. Addressing the guests, the businessman congratulated President Ye on his birthday and stated that he wanted to give this set of cigars to him. Henry and his relatives were shocked by Harold's intention to give Ethan a gift worth several million. The girls were also amazed, because they knew that Mr. Harold usually did not give more than 200,000 at weddings. Shaking hands with the businessman, the hero admired his generosity and noted that they had already become business partners. It remained a mystery to Lily why Harold gave such luxurious things to Ethan if he was not the real president. While those present were watching the distinguished guests and the expensive gifts, a noise suddenly came from the street. Meanwhile, Scarlett, sipping her drink relaxedly, thought with a smile that the real show was just beginning. Suddenly, a servant reported to Mr. Fan that several dozen uninvited guests had gathered at the entrance to the hall, and the man ordered them to be thrown out. However, the servant explained that these people were ready to donate 10,000 as a gift just to be present at the wedding. Henry and his wife were completely confused, not knowing how to perceive such a strange situation. And then, remembering that today was a big day for his son, the man ordered the staff to set up additional tables. Joshua noted with pride that his father had a lot of influence, so small companies were eager to win his favor. However, Lily had a bad feeling about this, because everything had been going wrong ever since Ethan's arrival. Soon, new guests from among the city's entrepreneurs entered the hall. They greeted Mr. Fan and congratulated him on his son's marriage. Some of the faces looked familiar to Joshua, and Henry asked the guests to tell him about their companies and businesses. The names Qi Cheng, Tianyu Online, and Sansheng Health Technology horrified Joshua, as these were the companies he had once invested in. Unable to contain himself, the groom screamed, calling them the very same trash that had suddenly collapsed and destroyed him. His father, shocked by this news, demanded to know the rest of the money from the $500 million that he had allocated to him. With shame in his voice, Joshua admitted that he had lost everything. At that very second, Henry punched his son in the face. The enraged man was beside himself with rage when he learned that his good-for-nothing heir had managed to squander $500 million in such a short time. Remembering Joshua's words about his father giving him $500 million, Lily couldn't understand how the groom managed to lose everything in an instant. Then Joshua blamed Ethan for everything, believing that it was the protagonist who caused his defeat. After this, some of the guests, having heard about President Ye, immediately headed towards him, ignoring the groom. Henry understood that if this circus continued, the fans would no longer be able to live peacefully in Yunzhou. Therefore, Henry demanded that the new guests be thrown out immediately. But they noticed that they had already given 10,000 as gifts, so the shameless fan family had no right to kick them out. Henry then ordered the people to be given double the amount, thinking about how much disgrace his family had suffered. Unable to understand how Joshua had crossed President Ye and incurred his wrath, the man was certain that the head of the corporation himself had lost no less. Then Ethan suggested that Henry should ask his son better, and asked him not to worry about money. For him, a couple of billion was not a problem. Hearing this amount, Lily called herself a complete idiot for divorcing Ethan and deciding to marry Joshua. However, Henry knew very well the saying that even a strong dragon could not defeat the local snake. Having lived in Yunzhou for several decades, the man had many connections in the criminal world, and these people would not leave him without help. Having nothing against such a lesson from Mr. Fan, the hero noted with interest that he would like to see his criminal brothers. An enraged Henry promised Ethan to fulfill his wish, but Jessica tried to stop her husband. However, he did not want to listen to his wife and pushed her aside. The woman fell to the floor, shocking those around her. To the surprise of everyone present, Ethan helped Ms. Jessica up and politely inquired about her well-being. For the enraged Joshua, the enemy's help to his mother looked like another provocation. Meanwhile, Henry went out into the street to meet the arriving bandits. In front of the groom's father stood Mr. Charles, Brother Watermelon, and their men. Henry greeted those he considered a great honor to see, hoping that they would help him deal with the enemy. However, before the wedding host could assure the guests that he did not need any gifts, the guests quickly passed him by. Left behind, Henry called out to Mr. Liu and asked him to wait for him. Returning to the banquet hall, the man tried to catch up with Charles. He wanted to introduce his friends from the criminal world to Ethan, but he didn't even have time to say their names. Suddenly, Brother Watermelon rushed forward and began to congratulate Mr. Ethan on his birthday, holding a gift in his hands. Following him, Mr. Liu also bowed, through whom the butler handed over the gifts to the birthday boy. Shocked by this unexpected turn of events, Henry could not believe his eyes. Smiling at the man's desire to set his criminal friends on him, Ethan pointed to Watermelon's brother and Charles. After this, the protagonist turned to the guests and asked them to disperse, as he himself had come here to drink to the health of the newlyweds. As he walked towards the exit, Mr. Liu quietly promised Henry that he would destroy his entire family if even one hair fell from the young master's head. As Ethan left, people marveled at his ability to control both legitimate businesses and the criminal underworld. The guests raised their glasses in honor of his birthday, perceiving the meeting with him as a gift from fate. After thanking everyone for their congratulations, President Ye noted that the main heroes of the day were still the newlyweds. He said he was going to return to the office and continue working as soon as he finished watching the wedding ceremony. Joshua called everything Ethan did today blatant revenge on the part of his former rival. Lily was sure that Ethan wanted to show all of Yunzhou that she had thrown away the pearl and exchanged it for a fisheye, and he had succeeded.